Back in the Rhino, Saint remained in the cargo hold, standing near the engineering workstation while Quentin continued the slow process of mending her armor and stone-like flesh. If people didn't know better, they would have thought that she was an actual statue. Since the healer was busy with the captain's echo, the rest of the irregulars found themselves robbed of his care, although no one sustained serious wounds, except for Sunny. There were still a few scrapes that had to be tended to, unexpectedly. Bate volunteered to administer first aid. As it turned out, she had some medical knowledge. The members of the cohort didn't care too much about who treated their wounds, really, well, except for Luster. The fool seemed very excited. For some reason, Sunny himself had long ago dismissed his battered armor and was sitting in the lounge area, looking at his black bodysuit with some regret. The uniform was truly the result of a magnificent design. Among other features, it was even able to repair itself. However, everything had its limits, with how much abuse he had put it through. The bodysuit was definitely a goner. It was full of holes, looking like a set of rags. His body beneath hurt all over, too.
Well, figures.
At least there was good news as well. The convoy was already moving forward after reaching the valley. The mundane soldiers and the civilians had been shocked to see the scene of slaughter there. They were even more disturbed after witnessing the narrow ravine where Sunny, Saint, and Nightmare had fought the Voiceless. In fact, even the members of the cohort seemed a bit pale. Regardless, the battle had gone surprisingly well for the convoy. Not only had they survived without suffering any losses, but the irregulars even managed to acquire 2 echoes. The monstrous hounds were going to be of great help in their long journey. Sunny's list of assets was slowly growing. He had made use of the echoes right there and then, commanding his soldiers to send them to recover soul shards from the corpses of the fallen and corrupted abominations of the voiceless swarm. Fishing out the black tongues from the water was too much trouble. So he had just left them there. Soon, the lake would freeze again, encasing the mangled corpses of the nightmare creatures in ice. That would probably be a macabre sight. Sunny had kept the soul shards of the corrupted to himself while sending the rest to the lone sleeper, whatever his name was. Just like that, the lucky bastard got even closer to fully saturating his core without ever lifting a finger. At least he was getting stronger. Sunny needed all the strength he could get. Still, he was a bit infuriated by how easily his subordinates were getting the good stuff. Was there no justice in the world? At least there were the memories he had received. Before Sunny could summon the runes, however, Bate approached him, carrying one of the unreasonably expensive medkits he had outfitted the Rhino with. He looked at her in confusion. The young woman frowned. Sunny asked, "What? What do you mean, what? I am here to treat you. Come on, get out of that raggedy uniform. I don't have all day, you know." Sunny stared at her for a bit. Bate let out a heavy sigh. Sunny conceded, "No need. Let's not do that whole bravado thing, okay? Even if you are a master, you are still going to bleed to death if I don't administer the clotting agent. With all these wounds, I need to clean them, too, unless you desire to risk going into septic shock, of course. In that case, be my guest. Stay where you are." Sunny remained silent for a few moments, then shook his head. He replied, "I don't bleed." The young woman blinked a couple of times. "Huh." He waved his hand and pointed to his body. Indeed, although there were plenty of holes in the bodysuit, there was very little blood.
"Bleeding is too pedestrian, so I don't bleed."
He waved his hand and pointed to his body. Indeed, although there were plenty of holes in the bodysuit, there was very little blood. Bleeding is too pedestrian, so I don't bleed. Bate stared at him, lost for words. He shrugged.
"That's all, go away, I am busy."
She gritted her teeth and glowered at him. "Oh yeah, what are you so busy with?" Sunny silently studied his bodysuit for a few moments and then answered in a somber tone. He muttered, "Being miserable." Bate flung her arms up, turned around, and walked away, left alone. Sunny summoned the runes, looking up his shadow fragments first. He breathed. Finally.
Shadow fragments 1601 4000.
His progress had slowed after being dispatched to L049, but now its speed was picking up again. Still, he had a long way to go. Next. Sunny checked on Saint and Nightmare.
Shadow fragments, 146,200. Nightmares required, 333, 1,000.
Once he fed the memories received from the black tongues to the quiet demon, she would finally cross the 150 fragments mark. Sunny murmured, 3/4 there. If Saint became transcendent, his power was bound to increase drastically. However, progress on that front was tortuously slow. With how many soul shards he now had access to, Sunny could have tried to create a few memories himself, but weaving memories required a lot of time and even more essence, and while the former was scarce, it was the latter that was truly precious. Essence was the most valuable thing in Antarctica. There was never enough of it. And since Sunny didn't know when the next battle would come, he couldn't allow himself to waste it on weaving ethereal strings. Making Saint a transcendent in the future wasn't going to help him if he died today, starved for essence and unable to fight well. On the other hand, his steed was collecting nightmares with extraordinary speed. It was probably because the dark destrier was harvesting the seeds that he had planted into the souls of abominations during the last 2 months. That was good, too. Sunny couldn't wait to learn what Nightmare's terror ability was like. Lastly, he studied the runes describing the mantle of the underworld.
Vanquished foes, 5732, 6,000.
And so close. If things didn't go well, he would probably fill the counter of the Prince of the Underworld enchantment before arriving at Erebus Field, or very soon after.
Good, I mean bad, I mean good. I do hope that we won't have to fight battles like the last one often on the way to safety, but if we do, at least I'll get something from it.
The problem was that the mantle was currently damaged and needed some time to restore itself. He could have summoned it and activated the Living Stone enchantment, but once again, that would consume a lot of essence, and Sunny was already dangerously short on it after slaughtering 2 entire swarms of abominations. He inhaled deeply, and then looked at the list of his memories. He murmured, "Let's see the main prize, then." Among them, 2 new ones especially attracted his attention. One was called Bitter Cusp, the other was called Stifled Scream. Sunny shifted a little, trying to find a position that caused him the least pain. His wounds were already healing, so to add insult to injury, he also felt itchy all over. Masters were vastly more resilient than mundane humans, and their bodies could naturally recover from being severely damaged, and that was without even counting the potency of the blood weave. However, the process was still not pleasant, trying to ignore the discomfort. Sunny decided to take a look at the Bitter Cusp first. It was one of the memories he had received after decimating the swarm of black tongues, and while all the rest would be best used to feed Saint, he felt like holding on to that one. The reason was very simple. Unlike the other memories, Bitter Cusp was of the ascended rank, concentrating on the runes. Sunny read,
Memory, Bitter Cusp, Memory Rank Ascended, Memory Tier I, Memory Type Tool.
A tool.
What kind of tool would the monstrous beasts have left behind? Sunny knew not to underestimate the value of utility, but still, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. The usefulness of this type of memories was often situational. The autumn leaf he had used to change the color of his hair was also a tool.
Hopefully, this thing will be more practical.
He continued to study the runes.
Memory description. They entered the beautiful halls of the Jade Court harboring venomous desires in their black hearts and hiding rapacious snarls behind their admiring smiles. The mistress of the palace herself presented them with a cup of the sweetest nectar. No matter how much of the sweet nectar they drank, the cup remained full. The more of it they consumed, the more of it they desired. Soon, there was nothing but bestial need left, and nothing but bitterness remained.
Sunny scratched the back of his head.
Well, that's one weird description. I do wonder if the Jade Court has something to do with that beetle I fought, though.
He turned his attention to the enchantments. There was only one.
Enchantment, black venom. Enchantment description. This cup overflows with a bitter venom. Don't drink it.
Sunny hesitated for a bit, then summoned the Bitter Cusp. Soon, a beautifully engraved chalice of white jade appeared in his hand. Indeed, it was full of a perfectly black liquid. For some reason, Sunny had a strange compulsion to take a sip. Maybe it was because the spell had straightforwardly instructed him not to, however. His intuition was telling him that the black liquid was, indeed, a deadly poison, and if it felt deadly to him, then it had to be rather potent. He muttered, "Yes, not drinking that, definitely." Politely asking an enemy to have a drink didn't seem like a good idea, which wasn't to say that there was no use for the ascended toxin. Smearing the black venom on a blade was one of them. For example, it would also not be a problem to stealthily add a drop or two into someone's food or drink. Not that he would do such a thing. Of course. Satisfied, Sonny dismissed the Bitter Cusp and concentrated on the second memory that had caught his attention. He had high hopes for this one, considering that it came from a corrupted demon, voiceless prelate, the runes read.
Memory stifled scream, memory rank transcendent, memory tier 3, memory type charm.
Charms were rare and extremely useful, and it was especially so for Sonny, considering that both Saint and the Mantle of the Underworld had the ability to fuse one into themselves. He already had one transcendent charm, but a second one was most welcome. Sonny murmured, "Jackpot." He continued to study the runes.
Memory description. A great river was contained within it, flowing endlessly from the future into the past. When doom came, many entered to seek shelter from it, and many had come to seek the truth. That was because the great river existed outside time, and so it was said that a dreadful secret was hidden at its estuary. Few of those capable dared to approach it, and none of those who had returned.
A mysterious. That description really hadn't told Sonny much. Perplexed, he remained motionless for a few moments, then shook his head and continued to read the runes.
Enchantments, echoing silence, word of power, echoing silence, enchantment description. When wearing this charm, the physical power of its master is augmented, but only as long as they remain silent. The longer their silence lasts, uninterrupted, the greater the boon of power they'll receive.
Sonny tilted his head, so it was a comprehensive physical boost. It started off modest, but would slowly grow for as long as the person wearing the charm didn't speak, or use their voice in any kind of way, be it to scream, laugh, or groan. The stretch of silence also had to be uninterrupted, meaning that the augmentation would be reset both if the condition was broken or if the charm was dismissed. Sonny murmured, "Interesting." Of course, there was a ceiling to this augmentation, but considering the transcendent rank of the stifled scream, that ceiling had to be a rather high one. That didn't seem too useful for Sonny at the moment, since he constantly had to talk to people and give orders. However, it was simply perfect for Saint, who was either incapable of speaking or chose not to. Even after all this time, Sonny still didn't know whether it was the former or the latter. Thoughtful. He glanced at the second enchantment.
Word of power enchantment description. A word spoken by the master of this charm is a command. If born of great silence, the word of power can hardly be ignored. If not, it has no worth.
That one was different. The enchantment was extremely powerful, since there were few limitations attached to it, commanding the enemies to kneel or turn on each other. Sonny could imagine many great uses for such an ability. However, its compelling power also depended on how long the wearer had remained silent before uttering the command. Ironically, this enchantment was extremely useful to Sonny, but utterly useless to Saint. What a complicated memory. With a sigh, he dismissed the runes and then stood up, walking to the communications suite of the Rhino. He then hailed Sergeant Gier on the radio. A few seconds later, Sonny heard a response. Sonny summoned the Bitter Cusp, placed it on the surface of the terminal, and stared at it with a pondering look. He answered, "Yes, Captain." He had a great idea on how to use it.
Ah yes, Sergeant Gier, listen, when we reach our next stop, I'll give you a very pretty cup. Be sure to have all our ammunition be treated with the black liquid from that cup.
A tiny bit of an ascended poison smeared across the blade of the Sin of Solace, or the cruel sight, would have very little effect on his performance in battle, considering that the only nightmare creatures that gave him enough trouble to require additional solutions would be all but immune to a negligent dose of the black venom. The only abominations such a small dose would kill were of the lower ranks, and he could already dispatch those easily. That wasn't the case for the mundane soldiers. However, to them, Even dormant nightmare creatures were a great challenge, not to mention the awakened ones. The Bitter Cusp could potentially change that situation entirely. Grinning ominously, Sunny lingered for a bit, and then added,
Oh, but make sure to not touch the liquid. If even a single drop gets on your skin, you'll die in gruesome, terrible agony. So, wear gloves, I guess. Better yet, use a long stick.
The convoy moved forward in the darkness, climbing the slopes of icy mountains and navigating the complicated network of old, forgotten concrete roads. They traveled north in a desperate hope to survive the calamity of the Chain of Nightmares. A day after the battle on the frozen lake, the convoy reached a derelict meteorological station and made camp. Military vehicles were arranged in a circle, with turrets facing out. Food was cooked and distributed to the refugees, and tired people settled in the half-collapsed buildings to sleep and rest. Sunny used that time to make his plans of coating the bullets of mundane soldiers with poison come to fruition. The process had turned out to be harder than expected, but they managed to find a solution in the end. The task of handling the Bitter Cusp was entrusted to the convoy's lone sleeper, whose green snakeskin armor imbued the young man with a high enough resistance to toxins. The old woman who had been going through her own first nightmare quietly passed away during that night. The fact that her body didn't turn into a frenzied abomination proved that she had passed the trial of the spell. However, it seemed that her weary soul was unable to form a stable core, and so it collapsed, turning the woman hollow. Sunny took the dark responsibility of disposing of the body upon himself. In the morning, they held a somber funeral under the eerie lights of the aurora, and then dove back into the bitter cold of the twisting roads. The small column of vehicles continued to struggle against the rough terrain and the dreadful conditions of the polar night as it slowly ventured deeper into the mountains. In the next few days, they had to fight against several more packs of prowling nightmare creatures. But none of them were as large and threatening as the two swarms the irregulars had eradicated before. The battle readiness of the convoy had increased due to Sunny's efforts and a bit of luck. The two new echoes served as forward scouts and provided invaluable support in combat. The ascended one, Abomination, was especially fearsome. The sleeper bell was growing into his power, too, and his core was well on its way to being fully saturated. The mundane soldiers were now capable of dealing with weaker nightmare creatures thanks to the Bitter Cusp. Saint was slowly growing stronger as her wounds healed, and the echoing silence enchantment of the stifled scream continued to accumulate power. Little by little, to the people of the convoy, things appeared to be looking up. However, Sunny knew that it was just an illusion. In truth, their situation was becoming direr with each day. The further north they moved, the more nightmare creatures there were. Navigating between powerful swarms of them was getting harder and harder, and so was avoiding the truly overwhelming hordes. The amount of small skirmishes the irregulars and their echoes had to fight was growing in both frequency and ferocity. For now, they were handling the pressure fine, but their fatigue continued to mount, while their physical condition deteriorated. Small scrapes and injuries they received were bound to add up. Sooner or later, their reserves of essence were also getting closer and closer to not having enough time to replenish between fights, even with Luster's help. Additionally, the deeper they went into the mountains, the more signs of destruction caused by the earthquake they encountered. Many roads were completely destroyed by rockfalls or buried under countless tons of glacial ice. Increasingly often, the Rhino couldn't handle clearing the path through the roads that remained. All of that meant that there were more and more enemies around, with less and less suitable paths to take. Sunny felt like a noose was being drawn tighter around his neck with each day. As a result, he had to lead the convoy forward using more risky routes. A few times, the civilian transports were very close to falling off the crumbling roads and plummeting into the deep gorges below, or being destroyed by falling debris. He had to leave the Rhino and use shadow chains to secure the vehicles, shield them, or pull them to safety with his own two hands. He even had to resort to coming close to the abandoned tunnels that pierced the mountains here and there, promising convenient shortcuts and shelter from the chilling wind. However, just looking at the dark portals of their hungrily open maws made Sunny shiver. Driving past the old tunnels filled him with a sense of deep, gnawing unease. The condition of the transports was also getting worse and worse, the rougher of a path he chose. The faster they broke down. Samara and Kim had to administer hasty field repairs more than a few times, but there was only so much they could do. Sunny breathed. No goddamn way. The engines of the vehicles stalled. Their wheels got stuck in the deep snow. The heating elements malfunctioned and filled the interiors with acrid smoke. The batteries cracked and leaked because of being both overheated and exposed to terrible cold. There was no end to the problems Sunny had to solve.
Damnation.
Sitting in front of a screen in the command suite of the Rhino, he stared at the map. Sunny had just finished updating it with the information his shadows had brought back from a lengthy scouting mission. Many lines had been crossed out, and many red marks shifted position, drawing a narrow net around the convoy. In the absence of the black bodysuit, he was back to wearing the puppeteer's shroud outside of combat. His old and reliable armor possessed an enchantment called Doubtless. But ironically, he was full of doubts, he muttered. Just how am I supposed to? At that moment, one of the transports behind the Rhino came to a screeching halt. The lights illuminating its interior went out, signaling a serious malfunction. The rest of the vehicles were forced to stop, too. Sunny looked down and sighed. What now? Standing up, he stretched, massaged his tired shoulders, and left the APC through the main hatch. Darkness and bitter cold welcomed him, and the cutting wind immediately tried to suck all warmth out of his body, walking through the light snowfall. Sunny headed to the back of the convoy. Saint's silent figure gazed at him from the roof of the Rhino, where she stood with a bow in her hands, looking up. Sunny found that the stars to the east appeared a bit hazy, as if veiled by something. A resentful frown appeared on his face.
Don't tell me, is the blizzard picking up again?
This was grave news. Walking toward the broken transport, Sunny was deep in thought. If the blizzard was really returning, things were going to get ugly for the convoy. Sure, the snowstorm would hide their location from the roaming swarms of nightmare creatures, but it would also all but destroy his own ability to track the abominations and keep his map up to date. Sunny and his shadows could see through the darkness of the polar night, but they couldn't see through the impenetrable wall of billowing snow. Additionally, the mundane drivers were going to have even more trouble with keeping their vehicles on the road. The vehicles themselves would suffer more stress as well. Should he insist on continuing to drive through the blizzard, or find a place for the convoy to wait it out? Sunny didn't like the thought of traveling across treacherous old roads in such hazardous conditions, but neither did he like the idea of being stationary, holed up in some cave like a blind rat, with no way to escape should things go south.
Damned blizzard, damned rust buckets. Why can't they all be like the Rhino?
Of course, that wasn't a fair comparison to make. His Rhino was a state-of-the-art military carrier, while the civilian transports were just that. Some of them could barely be used to carry people, even since they had been hastily refitted from industrial cargo vehicles in preparation for the evacuation campaign. It was a miracle that they were able to move. Honestly, approaching the cause of the current setback, Sunny had to walk around the massive body of Abomination, who was laying on the road and staring east. The massive beast seemed to have sensed the approaching blizzard as well, considering how intently it was looking at the sky. Snowflakes were falling on its rugged fur. The smaller Echo, Blackie, or whatever the awakened beast was called, was there as well, leaning against the larger one. It had a habit of following the stronger monster everywhere, while Abomination mostly ignored its existence.
Damned mongrels, would it kill you to make way for me? I am the master of your masters, you know. Show some respect.
Shaking his head, Sunny reached the transport. Samara, Kim, and Quentin were already there, running diagnostics with grim expressions on their faces. He didn't like the look of that. Sunny asked, "What's the situation?"
It's serious this time. There was a charge overload in the hub relay, causing the main battery to be cut off from the rest of the systems. Usually, that wouldn't be too debilitating, but this transport already lost both the support battery and the backup accumulator. There's a lot of melted wiring. Quentin can restore some, but other parts will need to be replaced.
Sunny didn't understand much of what she had said, but then again, He didn't need to. That was the whole reason for employing specialists. He had become a big fan of delegation.
So, how long is it going to take to get this transport moving again?
Samara looked at Kim and Quentin, then hesitated for a bit.
About 2 hours if we move fast.
Sonny closed his eyes for a moment. 2 hours, that wasn't impossible, although cutting it close. Their window of opportunity to drive past the nearest horde allowed for such a delay, but not much more. If he let the convoy stall for 2 hours, there would be no space for mistakes in the next day or so. Could he afford that? Or should he abandon the transport and relocate people to the remaining ones, thus overloading the struggling vehicles even further and increasing the risk that they themselves might break down in turn?
Curse it, did Nephis have to deal with this amount of nonsense during her short stint as the Bright Lord?
Leading 1,000 crazed sleepers through a bloody revolt and a suicidal crusade might have been a bit harder than he had thought. Being in charge of hundreds of people wasn't at all fun. Sonny was slowly starting to understand why the sovereigns were all suffering from some sort of lunacy. He sighed.
I can give you 110 minutes. If it's not done until then, though, we'll load the refugees on other transports and abandon this one. For now, do what you can. Jir will make sure that the passengers aren't cold.
With nothing much to do after that, Sonny walked aside and stood in the shadows as his subordinates got busy with their tasks. He thought about returning to the warm interior of the Rhino, but decided against it. He had been cooped up inside it for a while, so some fresh air, even if it was bitterly cold, was a welcome change. The refugees inside the dead transport didn't seem too discouraged, especially after soldiers brought a portable heater. The sleeper was there too. His lantern memory chased away the darkness, helping the civilians cope with their fear. And speaking of the sleeper,
currently, we don't have any more infected, which means that the infirmary transport is empty. If things don't go well with the repairs, I can just reassign the passengers there. That can be a good stopgap solution. There'll be trouble when someone does catch the spell, of course.
his thoughts were interrupted by Abomination, who suddenly let out a low growl, considering the size of the massive monster. Its growls reverberated through one's very bones and weren't easy to ignore. Sonny turned and looked at the echo with a frown.
What's up with him, her, and whatever, and what's up with that thing?
Abomination's monstrous snout was gnashed, revealing rows of terrifying fangs. It was still laying on the road, staring at the eastern skies. The echo looked tense. The other beast by its side was also acting nervous. However, it seemed to be simply repeating after the larger one without understanding the reason. Sonny's frown deepened, turning into a scowl. That can't be good. He walked over to Abomination and tried to climb on it to get a good vantage point. He barked, "Don't move, you bastard." Reaching the creature's withers, he looked east, seeing the same thing that it saw. The veil of the blizzard had grown closer, and a large part of the horizon, what little of it could be seen between the towering mountain peaks, was now hidden by it. Sonny didn't notice anything else, though. He wondered, does it not like snow? Then again, that blizzard wasn't of natural origin. It was caused by a titan called Winter Beast. From what Sonny knew, the titan was currently being suppressed by St. Tyrus somewhere far to the north. That was why the snowstorm came and went, hinting at who was prevailing in the clash at the moment. Sky Tide's aspect also had to do with controlling winds and storms, so while it didn't directly counter the titan's powers, she could at least challenge its authority. In any case, Winter Beast couldn't be anywhere near the convoy. Then why? Suddenly, Sonny's eyes narrowed, looking closer at the distant haze obscuring the cold, dark sky. He suddenly had a very disturbing idea. Was it really the blizzard? Sonny stared at the distant haze for a few moments, then glanced at Kim, who was busy with repairs. The evil eye memory he had given her was supposed to make one capable of seeing things at a greater distance. However, there was an easier way. He called out to Sergeant Gier, who happened to be hurrying past at that exact moment. Sonny called, "Hey, Sergeant." The man stopped and looked at the captain, who was standing on top of the terrifying monster the irregulars had recently received from the nightmare spell. For some reason, already accustomed to their leader's eccentric behavior, The soldier didn't even bother to try and guess the reason. He answered, "Yes, Captain." Sonny lingered for a moment.
What are they called, and binoculars?
Jir nodded. "Of course, sir. We have several pairs, one per vehicle, standard military issue." Sonny gave him a tense look, then said quietly,
Go bring me the best ones.
Slightly disturbed by that tone, Jir glanced at the bundle of blankets he was carrying, then dropped them into the snow and dashed toward the tail of the convoy. Very soon, he returned with a pair of modern binoculars and, not daring to approach the monster, threw them to the captain. Sonny caught them, brought the unfamiliar device to his eyes and looked east. At first, the image was blurry and unclear, but then something hummed softly, and it came into focus on its own. Suddenly, it felt as though he was standing much closer to the slope of a distant mountain. Sonny could even see the individual boulders, as well as mounds of snow between them. Moving the binoculars, he searched for a stretch of open sky. A few seconds later, he finally laid his eyes on the haze that obscured it. Sonny remained motionless for around a minute after that, then silently lowered his hands. His face remained still, but his eyes were suddenly terribly bleak. Feeling something, Sergeant Jir cleared his throat. He asked, "Sir, what's it?" The captain looked at him with those bleak eyes, making the soldier shiver. Sonny repeated the question in his mind. He murmured, "What's it?" What he had seen wasn't a wall of swirling snow. Instead, it was a ghastly creature that resembled a mix between a bat and a leech, with leathery wings, a long neck, and a head that seemed to be one giant, fleshy, circular maw. In fact, he saw thousands and thousands and thousands of them. The hazy veil that obscured the sky wasn't caused by the returning blizzard. It was a horde of flying abominations that was so vast that it resembled a rolling storm front from a distance. That vast horde of horrid abominations was swiftly moving in their direction. Suddenly, Sonny's mouth was terribly dry. He glanced at the convoy that stretched along the narrow road, a few vehicles blocked from moving any further by the broken transport. Sergeant Jir's tense voice caught his attention. Sonny forced himself to focus on it, pulling his mind back to reality. Jir ventured, "Sir."
Dead, they're all dead. Throwing the binoculars back to Jir, he threw all unnecessary thoughts out of his mind and issued an order. Get these people out and load them into the infirmary transport. Do it as fast as possible. No, faster than that.
Jir blinked. He protested, "The infirmary transport." But, interrupting him, Sonny barked. He snapped, "Now." The soldier flinched. This was the first time he heard the usually cool-headed captain shout. Understanding that something had gone terribly wrong, Jir ran toward the broken transport. A few minutes later, the frightened refugees were being hastily loaded into the infirmary vehicle. The soldiers were running around, preparing for a swift departure. The irregulars were getting ready for a fight. Sonny urged, "Move, move, move." Sonny was in the middle of all this havoc, giving orders.
Load the poisoned ammunition immediately, all of it. Empty the reserves entirely. Throw all non-essential cargo out. We need as much speed as we can get. Samara. You've 3 minutes to charge as many bullets as you can. Luster. Prepare the Rhino for an all-out charge.
We're never going to make it. There's no chance. Simply none. The enormous horde of flying horrors was traveling too fast. The fleet would never be able to outrun it, even if they were moving on a flat and well-maintained road. Of course, fighting it wasn't an option, either. If the appalling creatures descended upon the convoy, everyone would be devoured within seconds. Sonny might be able to survive by turning into a shadow, but the rest? Everyone would die a gruesome death, and yet, the horde seemed to be traveling from east to west, while the fleet was heading north. If, by some miracle, they managed to escape from the path of the abominations, maybe there still was a sliver of hope for them. Perhaps there even was some shelter ahead, one that Sonny had missed when he was compiling the map. In any case, he couldn't bring himself to just give up. No matter how small the possibility, he owed it to these people to make an effort to save them. He had taken them under his command. After all, they were his responsibility. Finally, the broken transport was cleared of civilians. Sergeant Jeer ran up to Sunny. Sunny barked, "Move." "It's done, Captain. What do you desire to do with?" Before he could finish the sentence, Sunny grabbed the massive vehicle by the front bumper, strained his muscles a little, and then tossed it over the edge of the road with his bare hands. The transport plummeted into the deep, dark gorge with thunderous clangor. It was so heavy that the road under them quaked from the violent force of the first impact. Sunny glanced at the stunned soldier.
Get everyone inside and start the engines. Hurry.
As everyone ran to their vehicles, Sunny stepped through the shadows and appeared inside the Rhino, sparing a glance at Professor Obel and Bate. He lingered for a moment and said,
Strap yourself in. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
They listened without asking questions, since most of the irregulars were assigned to the civilian transports. The only other person there was Luster. He was already in the pilot's seat, ready to send the APC forward at Sunny command. Sunny didn't make him wait long. He snapped, "What are you waiting for? Go." The Rhino shot forward, plowing through snow as it cleared the way for the other vehicles. The fleet followed as they moved across the mountain road with reckless speed. But not enough of it. On the roof of the APC, Saint was effortlessly holding her balance, standing there like a statue. She slowly turned her head east. Then, the quiet demon lingered for a moment and silently raised her bow. The Rhino flew forward, somehow navigating the twists and turns of the narrow mountain road without plummeting off its crumbling edge. There was nothing but darkness ahead, with snow swirling as it melted in the powerful beams of light that shot from the roof of the heavy vehicle. For once, Luster seemed serious and completely concentrated, his fingers wrapped around the yoke so tight that they had turned white. The convoy did its best to keep up. The civilian transports were sandwiched between the APC and the military vehicles, shaking precariously as they rolled forward at high speed. Sergeant Jeer and his soldiers were hastily loading the poisoned ammunition into the feeding mechanisms of the turrets, turning their barrels east and aiming spotlights at the sky. The veil obscuring the horizon was getting closer and closer.
Damn.
Sunny was standing behind Luster, perceiving the world through the eyes of his shadows. They were gliding far ahead, scouting the path in search of serious obstacles and possible shelter. There was none to be found, and the devouring swarm was too fast to outrun. Suddenly, his head jerked sideways, a dozen or so meters ahead. A swift silhouette lunged at the approaching Rhino from a deep crack in the cliff's face. All Sunny had time to see was a powerful body, a glint of madness burning in a pair of frenzied eyes, and dozens of sharp claws that shimmered as if made of metal, before the attacking nightmare creature that had laid in ambush received a chance to collide with the APC. A black arrow pierced its neck, throwing the abomination back and nailing it to the stone slope. Standing on the roof of the Rhino, Saint drew the string of Morgan's Warbow again as the pinned corpse flashed by. Luster flinched, but kept the vehicle steady. Sunny had nothing to answer. Luster breathed, "And that was a close one, sir." They had to move with as much speed as they could muster, but advancing in such a reckless manner brought its own risks. Not being able to discover ambushes in advance was one of them, and even then, it would most likely not be enough. By now, everyone could tell that the approaching haze was strange and unnatural. They wouldn't be able to see the flying horrors with their own eyes for a few more minutes, but fear was already spreading through the convoy. Sunny didn't really need to tell anyone to hurry. He muttered, "Go faster." But staying silent was too nerve-wracking, even for him.
Curse it.
In his mind was the image of the map of the mountains. Studying it, Sunny was feverishly trying to find a way to escape. He already knew the optimal route to take, but had a sinking feeling that it was already too late. He didn't know the speed of the approaching horde, but judging by how fast the distant sky was being devoured by it, their chances were slim. Up ahead, a stray nightmare creature appeared on the road before it could react. A massive shape lunged at it from the darkness. Abomination's powerful jaws closed on the monster's throat, and then the echo threw it into the abyssal darkness of the gorge with a powerful twist of its neck. Then, the ascended monster dashed forward, followed by the smaller echo. Soon, they reached a fork in the road and stopped, unsure of where to go. Sunny knew, however, his shadows had already explored both roads, confirming the information reflected on the map. A few moments before the Rhino reached the fork, he leaned forward and spoke to Luster.
Take the right path.
The right path was the only acceptable choice if they wanted to have even the tiniest hope of getting out of the path of the flying swarm. There was one problem, however. A few hundred meters ahead, it was blocked by the bodies of a pack of prowling nightmare creatures. Soon, Luster saw them, too.
Captain, what do we do?
Sonny gripped the back of the pilot's seat and leaned forward. He snapped. Just plow through them. What else could they do? The wedge-shaped ram of the Rhino was already lowered. The abominations were awakened. At best, tons of swiftly moving metal were bound to make short work of them, or if not, at least toss them off the road. Luster gulped and followed the instruction, accelerating toward the fearsome nightmare creatures without even a hint of slowing down or trying to avoid a direct collision. Not that it was possible to maneuver around the abominations on the narrow road. Anyway, before the creatures had time to properly react, the Rhino shuddered as it slammed into the abominations, and its armored windshield was instantly splattered with a revolting mix of blood and mangled flesh. Without skipping a beat, Luster prevented the vehicle from lurching sideways with a small shift of the yoke and moved his gaze to the screen showing the feed from the external cameras, until the wipers managed to clean the armored glass. Looking through, it was all but impossible. Just like that, the pack of abominations was either torn apart or thrown off the road, clearing the way for the convoy, except for one, clinging to the ram of the Rhino. A bleeding beast hoisted its massive body up, a powerful limb rising to strike a devastating blow on the windshield. Before it could, however, the shadows nesting between spotlights on the APC's front surged forward, forming into sharp spikes. They pierced the creature and then lost their solidity, turning into black tentacles. A moment later, the abomination was torn apart from the inside and flung into the darkness below. Sonny gritted his teeth and then flinched as one of the rearview cameras registered a flash of light coming from the turret of Jur's military vehicle. Turning his attention to it, he saw that the soldiers had opened fire. He urged, "Keep going." They were firing at the sky. The devouring horde was still some distance away, but the first straggler had just appeared from the cold darkness and dove down toward the convoy. The creature wasn't too large, but looked even more terrifying and revolting up close. A rain of bullets tore at its body, delivering the Bitter Cusp's toxin. It should have been enough to kill the flying abomination, but the effect of the poison wasn't instantaneous. Either the soldiers had reacted too slowly, or the nightmare creature was too fast. No matter the reason, its mangled, convulsing body kept falling, approaching the windows of one of the civilian transports. That was before another arrow flashed through the air, slicing the abomination in half. The severed part struck the slope and then rolled down, soon disappearing under the wheels of the speeding vehicles with a repulsive crunch. Sonny let out a shaky breath, relieved. The worst was only starting, though, because after that first creature was killed, the turrets didn't stop firing.
You've slain an awakened beast, brood of the Devouring Cloud.
The road sloped down, soon reaching the bottom of a deep gorge and continuing forward along its twists and turns, not afraid of sliding into the abyss anymore. The convoy received some breathing room and accelerated even more. However, despite that, their situation only worsened. By now, the distant mountains had already disappeared, swallowed entirely by the veil of the approaching swarm. Only a few nearest peaks remained visible. But even they were already turning hazy. More and more flying abominations that had traveled ahead of the horde were diving at the convoy, their fleshy circular maws opening wide to bite at the speeding transports and the soldiers operating the turrets. At first, they came one after another. Then, a few appeared at the same time. At some point, the rumble of the firing turrets turned into one continuous, rolling cannonade. High above, the ghostly aurora glimmered among the stars. Slowly turning crimson, Sonny was cursing the world, tired of waiting powerlessly inside the Rhino. He climbed to its roof through the upper hatch and swayed as a furious wind assaulted him with cutting cold. A few steps away, Saint was standing straight, sending one arrow after another into the dark sky. Each arrow reaped a life, and the bodies of abhorrent creatures were raining down on the snow behind the convoy, in a gun nest on the roof of one of the civilian transports. Samara was discharging her rifle time after time, and somewhere high above, bloody explosions of charged essence bloomed with each shot. The other awakened were assisting the soldiers as well. However, even though each possessed a memory capable of dealing damage at range, they were less proficient with them. The sleeper, ironically, was the closest the convoy had to a marksman after Saint and Samara. His quiver was full of poisoned arrows, in an infuriating turn of events. Sunny was the only one without a suitable weapon. He only had one bow, and that one was currently being used by his shadow.
Curses.
The undying chain was already encasing his body, and the dying wish was calling out to the nightmare creatures, compelling the nearest ones to aim at him, and him alone. That made the pattern of their attacks a little bit more predictable, causing more bullets to hit their mark. He didn't know what else to do. All of it was meaningless. Anyway, the convoy could kill 1,000 of these flying monstrosities, and it would still be no more than a drop in the ocean with each minute. The number of attacking abominations was mounting, and with each second, the devouring cloud was drawing closer. Soon, it would envelop the gorge completely, and then, all their efforts would end in a gruesome and bloody finale. Sunny didn't think for a second that the convoy would be able to fight through countless thousands of the flying abominations.
Why did I not account for it? Fool, damned fool.
The undying chain was already encasing his body, and the dying wish was calling out to the nightmare creatures, compelling the nearest ones to aim at him, and him alone. That made the pattern of their attacks a little bit more predictable, causing more bullets to hit their mark. He didn't know what else to do. All of it was meaningless. Anyway, the convoy could kill 1,000 of these flying monstrosities, and it would still be no more than a drop in the ocean with each minute. The number of attacking abominations was mounting, and with each second, the devouring cloud was drawing closer. Soon, it would envelop the gorge completely, and then, all their efforts would end in a gruesome and bloody finale. Sunny didn't think for a second that the convoy would be able to fight through countless thousands of the flying abominations.
Turn left.
Luster's hands reacted faster than his mind, sending the Rhino into a sharp turn. The vehicles trembled as its wheels left the somewhat intact surface of the better preserved road and entered the more dilapidated one. The young man spared a glance at his captain. Luster asked, "Sir, where are we going?" Sunny paled a little, he murmured, into a hungry maw. He didn't need to explain further, really. Now that they had entered the derelict road, there was only one way, forward, and there, ahead of them, waited something that he had hoped to avoid at all costs, the dark portal of an old, abandoned tunnel. Not too long ago, Sunny had sworn that he would never enter one, but now he could only pray that they would reach it. As the convoy desperately drove toward the distant entrance of an old tunnel, the devouring cloud finally reached the gorge. The sky disappeared, blotted out by a slithering mass of the winged abominations, and submerged the world into impenetrable darkness. Even the dim glint of the shimmering stars was extinguished. The swarm flowed down the slopes of the mountains like a tidal wave, penetrating the armored frame of the Rhino. A deafening rustle of countless beating wings assaulted Sunny's ears. He grimaced, glanced at the screens one last time, and dashed back to the roof hatch. Once he climbed outside, the noise grew many times more violent, making it seem as though a hurricane was raging around him. The mass of nightmare creatures was seconds from swallowing the rearmost vehicles of the convoy. The overheated barrels of the turrets continued to discharge a barrage of bullets into the rushing wave of abominations, long tongues of flame blooming from their glowing muzzles. At that point, the soldiers didn't even have to aim to hit the enemy. However, all their efforts were in vain. Sunny would have needed thousands of soldiers and hundreds of heavy artillery vehicles to put a dent into the swarm of abhorrent abominations. But he just needed to buy a little time. Sunny called, "Saint." Following his mental command, the shadow turned and threw Morgan's warbow in his direction. Catching it, Sunny took a moment to balance himself on the swaying roof, and then drew the string with furious determination. All four of his shadows flowed forward from his fingers, A bolt of lightning streaked through the air, striking one of the brood beasts. The creature's body disintegrated in a blinding flash, and then dancing arcs of electricity spread through the swarm, stretching in all directions for dozens of meters. For a moment, the whole world was illuminated by a stark radiance. That bought the convoy a few more seconds. At most, Sunny muttered, "Not enough." Even if Sunny had essence to spare, he couldn't use the strike of thunder repeatedly. Like almost all memories, it needed time to be summoned and dismissed. Although the whole process took no more than a dozen of seconds, right now, that was enough of a delay to doom them all. If Winter was here, she would have had a solution, but sadly, Sunny was all alone, well, not quite, on the roof of one of the civilian transports. Samara overcharged her powerful rifle, causing some of the circuitry inside of it to melt in a rain of sparks. The usual electric whine of the activating coil was devoured by the cacophony of thousands of beating wings, but the thunderous roar of the resulting shot wasn't. A brilliant particle of light traveled toward the swarm at a tremendous speed, and then detonated with staggering violence. A huge explosion shook the ground, swallowing a whole swath of attacking abominations. Samara swayed and spat a mouthful of blood, showing signs of severe essence depletion. But the rest of the irregulars weren't remaining idle either. The deluge of poisoned bullets and their memories were doing their job, buying the fleet precious time. The tunnel was getting closer and closer. But it was still not enough. The rearmost military vehicle was already suffering under an onslaught of attacks. Its armored hull was being cut open and peeled off, and blood was flowing down its sides. The soldier that had been operating the turret was nowhere to be seen, but another had already taken his place, only to scream a moment later when the razor-sharp fangs of a frenzied brood beast sunk into his arm, as blood rained down. The soldier gritted his teeth and drew his sidearm, discharging several mundane bullets into the creature's neck without any result. Sunny didn't see the rest. The strike of thunder had finally manifested itself back into existence, and the shadows had just returned. So he sent the caged lightning into the swarm once again, attracted by the dying wish. Many abominations were ignoring the rest of the convoy and lunging at the Rhino. For now, none of them had gotten past Saint, who brandished the sin of solace as he protected him. However, Sunny knew that he wasn't going to remain safe for much longer. Their salvation was so close. And yet their time was up. Despite all their efforts, Sunny and his soldiers couldn't hold the Devouring Cloud back anymore. The convoy was already surrounded by the mass of nightmare creatures from all sides, in stunned horror. Sunny watched as the rear vehicle was swallowed by the swarm of abominations. Its armor disintegrated as if made of paper, shredded into nothingness in a mere second. What followed?
To hell with this.
Before Sunny knew what he was doing, his body moved forward, dashing to the back of the Rhino. He flooded his muscles with essence and jumped. I must have gone crazy. Sunny soared into the air above the convoy, sensing sharp fangs scraping against the bleak steel of the undying chain on his belt. An attractive lantern cut of black stone suddenly opened, letting out a surge of darkness. Wreathed in that darkness, he plummeted down and landed on the roof of the damaged vehicle. Dozens of tentacles exploded from the kneeling figure that was shrouded in shadows, tearing countless brood beasts apart. More shadows flowed down like water, covering the breaches in the vehicle's hull and solidifying into impenetrable armor. At the same time, black walls rose from the ground, surrounding the convoy. Hundreds of brood beasts furiously crashed into them, causing the walls to shudder. However, at least for the moment, they held ahead of the column. The Rhino finally reached the tunnel and drove through its entrance, disappearing into the lightless emptiness within. One after another, the other vehicles, as well as a few nightmare creatures, followed. The abominations were swiftly gunned down or killed by the irregulars. The damaged vehicle that Sunny had landed on entered the old tunnel last, rolled forward for a few seconds, and then came to a screeching halt. He fell down from its roof and hit the ground hard, then stood up with a stagger. Another wall of shadows rose, blocking the mouth of the tunnel behind them, this one much thicker than the previous ones. Instantly, it came under a savage attack. its black surface trembled, not cracking yet, but also visibly struggling to withstand the never-ending rain of blows in the echoing silence of the tunnel. Sonny bent over, spat blood, and then tiredly looked up. His voice sounded stifled.
Someone better blow up that entrance fast.
The convoy stopped soon after entering the tunnel, for a few moments. Nothing apart from the muffled blows that continued to rain on the wall of shadows could be heard. Scared and exhausted, the people were all lost and slightly disoriented. Sonny's voice brought them back to reality, glancing into the depths of the tunnel to make sure that nothing was attacking them from that direction. At least not yet. He backed up a little and studied the cold stones above him. Surely. Detonating a part of the tunnel's roof wasn't the smartest of ideas, considering how old it was. However, the alternative was even worse. They had to stop the brood beast from following the convoy inside, and his wall of shadows wasn't going to last long, considering how little essence Sonny had left. He had truly burned through a lot of it during that last desperate dash to save the rear vehicles. Actually, Sonny hadn't even known that he was capable of doing something like that. The scope and scale of that complex use of shadow manifestation was unlike anything he had been able to achieve before. The urgency of the situation and the raging adrenaline had helped him achieve a new level of mastery over his aspect. And now, he was exhausted. So, the entrance of the tunnel had to go.
I'll feel really awkward if there's a collapsed section of it further ahead.
Still, the convoy could find a way to dig through stone debris. They wouldn't be able to resurrect from the dead if the Devouring Cloud swallowed them whole, though, with the help of explosives that Sergeant Gier provided, Kim's ability to see weak points of both living and inanimate objects, and Professor Obel's knowledge of mundane science, they were able to detonate a few small charges and collapse the entrance of the tunnel, cutting themselves off from the outside world. Now, there was no way back, only forward, deeper into the darkness. Nevertheless, the people were finally safe, relatively speaking, of course. They still didn't know what awaited them ahead in the eerie expanse of the old tunnel, so Sonny posted plenty of sentries in front of the Rhino. Only then did he have time to assess the state of things. The convoy looked battered. Every vehicle received at least a little damage, and many were splattered with blood of the nightmare creatures that the irregulars and the mundane soldiers had killed. However, almost all of them could still move. The only exception was the rear military vehicle that Sonny had saved. That one was a complete goner. In fact, it looked more like a heap of scrap metal than a working machine now. The fact that it had somehow managed to drive into the tunnel was nothing short of miraculous. Its crew had suffered, too. One of the soldiers was dead, and the rest were seriously wounded. A few of them would have died from those wounds, too, if not for Quentin. Currently, he was trying to stem the bleeding of a turret operator, whose arm was terribly mangled. Even with the healer's abilities, the man's limb was too damaged to preserve. After taking one glance at the terrible mess of torn flesh and splintered bones, Sonny knew that it would have to be amputated. He had already been in a somber mood because of the exhaustion, but now it turned even darker. Perhaps he should be thanking the dead gods that only one of his men had been killed during the desperate escape from the Devouring Cloud. But Sonny didn't feel thankful. Instead, he remembered the brazen claim he had made to Professor Obel not too long ago, a promise to try and save everyone who had entrusted their lives to him. Sonny had already failed that promise twice. The death of the old refugee woman had been outside his control, but the fallen soldier, that one was a direct result of his decisions. Sonny had killed many people in the past, but he had never been responsible for someone's death, or rather, had never experienced the death of someone whom he was responsible for. It was a bitter, scathing feeling. Why did he have to bear the burden of some stranger's death? Who asked that soldier to be so weak? Sonny clenched his fist. So annoying. He remained motionless for a while, then winced. In any case, the loss of a military vehicle was painful but not impactful. Losing another civilian transport would have been much more damaging, not to mention lethal. The wounded soldiers would be out of commission for a few days or longer, depending on the severity of their injuries. But in the end, they're going to survive. All in all, they had all gotten off easy. Sonny had fully expected to watch the whole fleet be destroyed after finding out about the approaching horde of flying abominations. Losing just a single soldier, no matter how resentful he felt about it, was incredible luck. Of course, they weren't out of the woods yet. He didn't know anything about the old tunnel, but suspected that traveling through it wouldn't be very safe. In fact, his decision to seek shelter inside could potentially result in a fate similar, or even far worse, than being quickly gobbled up by the devouring cloud, he muttered, brimming with optimism. Am I? Any kind of nightmare creatures could have built a nest here after the chain of nightmares came. More disturbingly, the tunnel could be home to something that had entered the waking world much earlier. Humans did a good job of either closing or containing those gates that opened within the borders or in the vicinity of population centers, out of necessity. But no one bothered or had resources to do the same in the wilderness, provided. Most gates manifested near places where a lot of people lived, but not all. Somewhere inside the tunnel, they could potentially meet an abomination that had been dwelling here for decades, or maybe even half a century. Surely, there was also a possibility that there were no nightmare creatures inside, and they're completely safe. Honestly speaking, the chances of that were equally high. Unconvinced, Sonny walked to the front of the convoy, past the massive form of the Rhino, and stopped near the sentries. Up ahead, a long stretch of the tunnel was illuminated by the headlights of the APC. He stared into the darkness beyond. After a while, Sonny looked down and let out a heavy sigh. He couldn't see anything. Sonny murmured, "That doesn't bode well." Not in the sense that there was nothing ahead, but rather that he couldn't see through the gloom that enveloped the tunnel, which could mean only one thing: that this place wasn't shrouded in shadows, but instead drowned by true, pure, elemental darkness. True darkness was different from light and shadows. Shadows existed in places where light was obscured or couldn't reach. If the shadow was vast and deep enough, people mistook it for darkness. But all it truly was the absence of light. True darkness, however, was more than that. It was an elemental force of its own, one that was both independent and opposed to light. Instead of a simple lack of light, pure darkness was its rival. Since light and shadows always went hand in hand, it was also the enemy of shadows. Strange as it may sound, that was why Sonny suddenly felt the cold touch of unease when he discovered its presence. True darkness was exceedingly rare and mysterious. He had only encountered it once before, in the ruined cathedral of the Dark City, where it had been born of and controlled by the cathedral's guardian, the Forsaken Knight, the bastard that had gutted him like a pig. In fact, that unfortunate encounter had been the fault of the darkness that the fallen devil wielded. If not for its veil, Sonny might haven't allowed the Black Knight to get so close. That was because his eyes, which were capable of peering through any shadow, were as blind in true darkness as that of a mundane human. Sonny hadn't seen the approaching Forsaken Knight in the shroud of darkness, and now he couldn't see into the depths of the tunnel. Worse still, the fallen devil of the ruined cathedral had only controlled a modest amount of true darkness. Here in the tunnel, however, there was a whole ocean of it. Sonny grimaced.
Well, here goes the hope that there are no abominations inside.
He remained near the sentries for a minute or two, then turned around and tiredly walked back to the Rhino.
We'll rest here for a few hours.
The convoy wasn't in any condition to continue moving. Anyway, the vehicles needed to be repaired, and the wounded had to receive treatment. People desperately needed rest. Besides, what good would it do to leave the tunnel before the devouring cloud moved on? They had to wait until the swarm passed through. Sonny was exhausted. As well, entering the Rhino, he fell on one of the seats in the lounge area and closed his eyes.
Why do I feel like we jumped out of the frying pan straight into the fire?
Nothing good ever came from going underground. Every time Sonny had, something nasty had been waiting for him there. His distrust of underground passages and tunnels was only rivaled by his dislike of the sea. At least the tunnel seemed dry. Scowling, Sonny tried to empty his mind and concentrate on circulating what little essence he had left through his body. No matter what came next, he had to be ready. Samara was recovering from utterly depleting her essence, and Quentin was busy healing the injured soldiers. Kim and Luster were performing field repairs on the civilian transports. The Sleeper was creating a new batch of poisoned bullets to replace those expended during the flight from the Devouring Cloud. Sergeant Jur's ammunition reserves were at a point where each round had to count. Only Belle and Dorn had nothing to do. Which was why Sunny chose them to accompany him on a scouting mission. He wanted to find out how far the exit from the tunnel was, or if not, then at least explore a long stretch of it before leading the convoy forward. Nobody knew how long the tunnel was. There were a lot of them cut through the mountains in the Antarctic center, where the terrain was too uneven to build straight roads. Whenever a road met a mountain outcropping that was too wide to go around, though, people had often chosen to simply burrow through it to create a convenient shortcut. As a result, the length of tunnels varied greatly, from several dozen meters to 10 kilometers or more. Most of them had been created during the dark times. Later, when the constant wars, environmental cataclysms, and the descent of the nightmare spell had reduced human population and concentrated it inside a small amount of vast and easily defended cities. Most of the mountain roads went out of use and were abandoned, so there was no information on the tunnel. It could have been only a few hundreds meters long or stretched forward for a dozen kilometers, considering the local terrain. Sunny suspected that the latter would turn out closer to the truth, summoning the cruel sight. He glanced at Belle and Dorn. They nodded. Sunny asked, "Are you ready?" They were standing in front of the Rhino. A few people were looking at the three irregulars, but only Professor Obel approached to see them off. They answered, "Yes, sir." "Be careful, young people. Places such as this can be quite dangerous. Don't use any memories or abilities that have to do with fire. 2. Now that we are underground, it would be all too easy to burn all the oxygen away." Sunny looked at the old man with a bit of tension hidden behind his outwardly confident expression. He asked, "Anything else we should know?" Professor Obel thought for a moment, then shrugged. Many of these tunnels went through several rounds of additional excavation to serve as bomb shelters during the latter stages of the war between the but those names probably won't tell you much. Suffice it to say, you might find that the structure of the tunnel isn't as straightforward as one might expect. Sunny sighed.
"We are going then. LFWE aren't back after 2 hours. Well, I'm not going to lie, if something manages to kill me, then all of y'all probably die soon too, so there's nothing much y'all be able to do at that point."
He tried to force out an encouraging smile, failed, and simply turned around, carrying luminous memories. Sunny and his people walked past the nervous sentries and dove into the darkness without looking back. Sunny had grown accustomed to using his shadows to scout ahead in dangerous situations, explore the world around him, and discover hidden threats. However, this time he couldn't, simply because the shadows were as blind as him in the embrace of true darkness. Walking deeper into the tunnel, he instantly felt tense and incredibly vulnerable. Things were even worse than Sunny had thought. Not only was his sight suddenly limited to a mere single point of view, not only could he not see anything outside the narrow circle of light created by the luminous memories like a more human. Even his ability to sense the shapes and movements of shadows was crippled, because, of course, no shadow existed within darkness. That unique part of his perception had become so ingrained into him that now that it was gone, Sunny felt blinded. It was as though he suddenly lost his eyes and ears. The whole world seemed strange, unclear, and muddled. The sudden change was so severe that he almost lost balance. Sunny breathed, "D-damn." Belle and Dorn, who lived their whole lives like that, didn't seem to be disturbed. Sure, they had somewhat come to rely on the ability to see in darkness that Kim often shared to them, but not to a degree where it became their second nature. Sunny, on the other hand, he was disoriented and felt utterly exposed. Grimacing, he gripped the shaft of the cruel sight tighter and continued walking. The blade of the somber spear didn't shine yet, instead absorbing some of the light produced by the lanterns of the irregulars. In case he needed it in the future, he murmured, "How horrible." The tunnel was wide enough for 2 vehicles to pass each other without brushing sides, and utterly empty. Nothing but impenetrable darkness filled its silent expanse. And so, their steps echoed, reflecting from the cold stone walls. Sunny glanced at Belle and Dorn with a bit of displeasure. He was walking as noiselessly as usual, trained to remain unnoticed by the long months of hunting down powerful abominations in the Dark City. However, the 2 fighters of the melee vanguard weren't versed in stealth, and their equipment wasn't suited for it, either.
Way to announce our position to everyone and everything. I've a bad feeling about this.
Although many nightmare creatures possessed some way to perceive the world in the absence of light, he was still used to being the one to stalk his prey unseen. Now, however, the roles were reversed. Sunny was at the mercy of whatever creature it was that hid in the darkness. And there had to be something there, without a doubt. True darkness, after all, hadn't come from nothing.
What kind of ghastly horror will I've to fight this time?
They carefully moved forward, sticking close to the wall of the tunnel. A few minutes passed, then a dozen. What Sunny feared the most didn't happen. Nothing attacked them, and there were no collapsed sections of the tunnel's roof that could block the convoy's way out. However, there was also no sign of exit. The tunnel simply stretched forward, seemingly endlessly and completely empty after a while. Sunny managed to shrug off his discomfort and adjust to having his perception severely crippled. As well as he could, it was still deeply disturbing, though half an hour passed without them encountering any threats.
How far do you think we have walked?
Bell and Dorn thought for a moment. The giant man shrugged. A deep frown appeared on Sunny's face. Bell murmured, 3 kilometers, maybe less. 3 kilometers wasn't a small amount, of course. There were far longer tunnels out there. The floor also seemed flat and didn't slope neither up nor down. Still, it was strange that they hadn't been attacked yet. Sunny murmured, keep your eyes open. The small scouting squad continued forward. After a while, they encountered a small opening in the wall of the tunnel leading into the depths of the mountain. The narrow branch, too, was drowned in true darkness. Standing near it, Sunny thought that he heard a distant hum. However, a moment later, it was gone, chased away by Dorn's voice.
This must be one of the additional tunnel shafts that Professor Obel spoke about. There's probably a whole network of them inside the mountain, excavated to house the population in case of a nuclear strike.
Bell scratched the back of his head.
Who uses nuclear bombs to kill people? Aren't bioweapons far more effective?
Sunny looked at him darkly. He retorted, I'll tell that to Europe. At that moment, Dorn cleared his throat. He offered, oh.
Actually, Captain, they used both nuclear and bioweapons in Europe.
Well, it wasn't like Sunny had received a good education. He had barely known that places other than Northern Quadrant Siege Capital existed before the fateful conversation with Master Jet. In any case, he had to decide whether they should explore the side branch of the tunnel or continue forward along the main one. In the end, he chose to stick to their current path. He didn't really care what was out there, in the old network of abandoned passages. As long as the convoy could drive past and reach the exit, Sunny didn't have to know. They walked and walked and walked, and nothing happened. At some point, the lack of terrible nightmare creatures lunging at them from the darkness started to disturb Sunny more than the possibility of a sudden attack. He murmured, this is too eerie. Eventually, 1 hour mark passed without them finding anything, not the source of the true darkness, not the nightmare creatures that might have made a nest in the tunnel, and not the exit. There wasn't even a hint of it.
Stop.
Sunny frowned as he looked forward. There was nothing but darkness ahead. In the end, he sighed and turned around. The scouting mission was both a resounding success and a resounding failure. They didn't find any active threats to the convoy, but they also failed to conclusively prove that there were none. In any case, the time he had allotted for the scouting mission was up. He sighed. Let's head back. Now, his best choice was to lead the convoy forward and hope for the best, despite the lack of nightmare creatures, or of anything, really. Inside the tunnel, Sunny felt very uneasy. Braving the silent darkness, they retraced their steps and arrived back to the collapsed entrance of the tunnel after a long and tense hour. Nothing dangerous happened on their way back, and the convoy seemed to have fared well in their absence. 2. The uneventfulness of it all was deeply disturbing. Hiding his concern, Sunny glanced at the dark walls surrounding them. The battered vehicles stood motionlessly, their wheels resting on the cold asphalt floor, here and there. People could be seen resting or hurrying to complete various tasks. I don't like this. Frowning, he headed toward the hatch of the Rhino. The people he needed to hear from were already gathered there, ready to report the state of things, as Sunny passed the sentries. One of them suddenly called out to him, "Captain Sunless, sir." He slowed down and gave the soldier a dark look. Sunny asked, "Yes." The man hesitated for a few moments. His face was still, but his tired eyes were full of some unknown, intense emotion. "Outside, I was part of the rear vehicle's crew. What you did for us back then, near the end, you really saved us. Thank you, sir." Sunny stared at him blankly for a bit, then turned away with a scoff.
I am in charge of this convoy. These are my vehicles, and you are my people. No one takes what's mine, especially without paying a price. Do you even know how much a vehicle like that costs? With that, he shook his head and walked away. What a weird guy. Irregulars, as well as Sergeant Gier, Professor Obel and Bate were waiting in the command suite of the Rhino. Sunny received several reports, which slightly improved his mood. The convoy had lost one civilian transport and one military vehicle as the result of encountering the Devouring Cloud. Luckily, it didn't affect their logistics too adversely, after sacrificing the mobile infirmary to accommodate the displaced refugees. All they had really lost was a bit of firepower. The remaining vehicles had all been patched up and ready to move. Sergeant Gier sighed.
"We don't have a lot of ammunition left, sir. Additionally, our reserves of drinking water are also severely reduced. We discarded a lot of it to lighten the load on the transports before the swarm arrived. It shouldn't become a problem in the next several days, but after that." Sunny waved a hand dismissively.
Don't worry about water. I've a literally endless source of water. He remained silent for a while, considering the options. They could either pass through the tunnel or remain where they were and try to dig their way out when some time had passed. Both options were less than ideal. It all comes down to how long I want to remain in the tunnel, it seems. The first option would allow the convoy to escape from underground sooner if all went well during the drive to the opposite exit. The second option would force them to stay inside for much longer, but didn't demand diving deeper into the chilling darkness. Neither was free of risk, curses. In the end, Sunny just really disliked the idea of staying in the eerie tunnel even a minute longer than it was necessary. He sighed. Start the engines, we're leaving. A few minutes later, the Rhino came to life and rolled forward, slowly gaining speed. The beams of powerful spotlights installed on its roof cut through the darkness, forcing it to flee and cling to the walls of the tunnel. The civilian transports and the military vehicles followed, staying close to the massive APC. The darkness flowed back and devoured everything once again behind them, making it seem as though the convoy was traveling inside a small, fleeting, fragile island of light. Sunny climbed to the roof of the Rhino and stayed there with Saint, staring into the darkness with a grim expression on his face. He was still blind to everything that was happening outside the small bubble of light, which made him incredibly nervous. Where is it? Where is the source of all this darkness? When will it attack? Minutes passed, but just like during the scouting mission, nothing happened. The convoy rolled forward with modest but constant speed. Meter after meter of old asphalt disappeared under the wheels of the Rhino, and the stone walls seemed to move past them, vanishing into the darkness. The tunnel was silent, with only the passing of the human vehicles making any noise from time to time. Side passages opened up to either left or right of the convoy, making Sunny especially nervous. All these paths sloped down, leading deeper underground. He was prepared for something to lunge at them from the darkness, but nothing did. Nor them. We don't need to set foot in those passages. We just need to reach the exit and escape this dreadful place. Just like that, an hour passed, and then another, and another. The tunnel continued to stretch forward, seemingly endless. The more time passed, the deeper Sunny's scowl became. After a while, he finally left the roof of the Rhino and dove back into its interior with a dark expression. Walking up to Luster, he ground his teeth and said, "That's enough, stop the convoy." Luster glanced at him questioningly, then shrugged. The APC slowed down and then stopped. The other vehicles followed suit, and soon the whole convoy came to a halt. Sunny left the Rhino and stood still for a few moments, staring at the weathered asphalt. Sergeant Gier and the members of his cohort soon approached from the direction of other vehicles. While Luster, Professor Obel, and Bate exited the Rhino through the hatch, Saint walked over to the edge of the roof. Looking at them from above indifferently, most of the gathered people had grave expressions on their faces, noticing the grim mood. Luster blinked a couple of times, then turned to Sunny.
Captain, why did we stop? Is there a problem? Sonny looked at him silently.
And yes, and there's a problem, you fool, can't you tell? Luster scratched the back of his head.
What, is there a nightmare creature ahead? Sonny sighed, then looked up.
No, there's nothing ahead, that's the problem. We've been driving for about 7 hours, correct. What was our average speed? The young man hesitated for a moment, then answered, 30 kilometers per hour, sir. They hadn't rushed and kept a modest speed. To be able to react in case danger appeared from ahead, Sonny nodded. That's more than 200 kilometers of going straight forward, and yet there's no exit. Do you see the problem now? Luster's eyes suddenly widened.
Oh, well, if you put it like that, it really is weird. Sonny gritted his teeth.
It's not just weird. If there was a tunnel of that length in Antarctica, it would have been the longest one in the world, by far. Everyone would have known about it. Luster paled a little, then studied everyone's faces.
How come no one did then, sir? Sonny looked down and shook his head.
There's only one possible answer. This tunnel, something is very, very wrong with it. Chapter 934, No Way Out.
There couldn't have been a tunnel that stretched under the Antarctic center for hundreds of kilometers. Not only would a structure like that be a miraculous feat of engineering, but far too many people, especially the army strategist and someone as knowledgeable as Professor Obel, would be aware of its existence. However, no one had been. Sonny remained silent for a while, then looked at the old man. Professor Obel simply shook his head. I am afraid I can't explain, which isn't too surprising after the nightmare spell descended. There are many things in the world that science, or rather, our limited scientific understanding, fails to explain. Sonny sighed and muttered, Great. What was he supposed to do now? It was clear that the laws of nature were either broken or worked differently inside the tunnel. Space wasn't behaving as it was supposed to behave. Or maybe they had simply traveled to some strange pocket dimension that was filled with nothing but true darkness. Maybe they were all under the influence of another mind hex. Maybe they had all been devoured by the swarm of brood beasts, and were now condemned to an eternal purgatory. Who could tell? Sonny cursed silently, then wrapped all 4 shadows around the undying chain to ramp up its mental protection. Nothing changed. The oppressive darkness didn't disappear. If anything, it seemed even more foreboding now. He closed his eyes for a moment, then said, All right, let's not panic yet. Sonny looked around, then walked to the wall of the tunnel and struck it with his fist. A startling bang rolled through the tunnel, echoing in the darkness. In the place where his steel gauntlet had landed, a small impression appeared, with a net of cracks spreading from it through the cold stone. He ordered everyone back into their vehicles. Everyone followed his instructions without asking questions. The convoy continued to move forward. However, this time, Sonny made it stop after 10 minutes and left the Rhino alone, wrapping the shadows around his body. He activated the Light Eater enchantment of the cruel sight to illuminate the path and ran back into the darkness, moving much faster than the vehicles had. He soon reached the point of the previous stop and studied the cracked section of the wall, then made his way back. The convoy moved for another 10 minutes. After that, Sonny commanded them to put the vehicles in reverse. The tunnel wasn't wide enough for the Rhino and the civilian transports to turn around and drive back. After a while, he gave the order to stop. This is bad. His seemingly erratic actions, of course, hadn't been without a reason. Sonny already knew that it was possible to go back to a previously visited spot inside the tunnel. Bell, Dorn, and himself had walked for around 6 kilometers during the initial scouting, and then safely returned to the convoy. The first stop he had ordered was to make sure that the same principle still applied. Indeed, he had been able to return to the marked portion of the wall from 5 kilometers away. The second stop was to test if something would change with more distance, and it had. They should have long seen the imprint of his fist and the net of cracks around it, but there was none. At some point in time, somewhere between 5 and 10 kilometers of separation, the mark had disappeared without a trace, which was very, very bad news for Sonny. It meant that they couldn't return to the collapsed exit from the tunnel, the way back. and the second option he had of escaping to the surface didn't exist anymore, staring into the darkness. Sonny felt a cold shiver run down his spine. If he had led the scouting party a few kilometers further, would they've been separated from the convoy forever? Would they be doomed to wander the darkness alone for the rest of their lives? He had come close to disaster without even knowing it. Sonny muttered, "I was lucky." One of his worst fears had become reality. Sonny was more than capable of fighting against enemies that he could strike down, even if their strength seemed overwhelming. However, he was as powerless as the rest against circumstances like the one they found themselves in right now, against threats that were both unseen and unexplainable, dooming those who encountered them silently and without warning, simply by existing. Against threats like that, he needed someone like Cassie, sadly. She was far away, probably preparing for the war between valor and song with the rest of the Fire Keepers. Damnation! He looked at the stone walls of the tunnel, then at the battered vehicles of the convoy. There were almost 400 people in them that he had promised to rescue. Was he going to become a liar? Sonny tilted his head a little, then blinked.
What nonsense am I thinking about? I've always been a liar. There's nothing for me to become. He took a deep breath. No, it's all right. I'll find a way out. After all, he didn't need to understand the nature of the trap. He just had to break it, somehow. Sonny rubbed his face, glanced at the darkness one last time, and gestured for Luster to continue driving the Rhino forward before anything else. They had to make sure that there was really no limit to the strange endlessness of the dark tunnel. The convoy traveled through the darkness, traversing kilometer after kilometer. More hours passed with nothing changing, then some more. Eventually, an entire day was gone, slowly. A sense of dread was spreading through the exhausted refugees and the mundane soldiers. Even the irregulars seemed tense. Sonny commanded everyone to stop and make camp. People needed rest, and nothing would improve if they persisted forward despite everything. As the soldiers started cooking food and arranging sleeping places for the civilians, he walked some distance away from them and called Sergeant Gier over. Gier jogged to where Sonny stood, half swallowed by darkness, and asked in a hoarse voice, "Yes, Captain, did you need something?" Sonny lingered for a few moments, looking back at the convoy. Then he looked at the sergeant and... "Zed? Yeah, I have 2 questions for you. How much food do we have left? And how long will the fuel cells of the transports last?" Chapter 935, Unmoored.
While the people of the convoy were settling in to rest, Sonny observed them with a dark expression on his pale face. Finally, he winced and headed back into the Rhino. There, the irregulars were waiting, unsure what to do. It wasn't like he had answers, either, but Sonny had to decide what their next steps would be. He hesitated for a few moments.
"Luster, Samara, and Dorn, go to sleep and report our situation. Perhaps Army Command has some idea about what we are dealing with here." Despite the ominous nature of the dark tunnel, things weren't as bleak as they seemed. The convoy was cut off from the first evacuation army in terms of actual support, but information still flowed between the cohort and their superiors, somewhere in the government databases. There had to be a hint on how to escape the endless darkness. Even if no one had ever encountered its source before, people would have clashed against something similar in the past, if not. Sonny would venture into the dream realm himself and seek out Cassie. With her powerful divination abilities, she was his best bet. More than that, he could transport food and other resources from the ivory tower with the help of the covetous coffer. So his people weren't going to starve. For now, time wasn't their enemy. They just had to find a way to solve the puzzle and escape. He sighed and said, "Unless something changes for the worse." In any case, there was no point in panicking yet. Sonny watched as 3 of his soldiers climbed into the sleeping pods, then sent the rest to keep watch over the refugees. The oppressive veil of darkness that muted his senses was still there, grinding on Sonny's nerves. He was tired, too. At least there's no call here. In fact, this was the first time in a long while when Sonny didn't hear the call at all. Everywhere else in the Antarctic Center, it kept whispering quietly into the ears of awakened. But here in the dark tunnel, the whispers were gone. He wasn't sure if that was a good sign or a bad omen. He murmured, "We'll see soon." Ordering his shadows to observe the temporary camp, Sonny climbed into a sleeping niche himself. Things were going to get better after he slept, if nothing else. His reserves of essence would be somewhat replenished. That alone was enough to make him feel more confident.
That night, Sonny had a nightmare. He dreamt of the ditch that he had crawled into after being gutted by the Forsaken Night, and of cold, overflowing darkness. That was an unpleasant surprise, since he had grown accustomed to sleeping peacefully ever since the Kingdom of Hope. His dreams were usually guarded by nightmare. If a bad dream appeared, it was promptly destroyed or subjugated by the Shadow Steed. But now that nightmare was himself slumbering after receiving wounds. Sonny was left without his protection. Too bad. Feeling less rested than he would have preferred to, Sonny went to the command suite of the Rhino and studied the monitors to get a glimpse of the convoy's camp. Everything seemed to be in order. The shadows would have woken him up if anything happened, but it was nice to make sure. He lingered for a while, then walked over to the kitchen area to brew himself some coffee. Sometime later, carrying a steaming cup, Sonny returned to the living area and leaned on a bulkhead. With nothing else to do, he simply stared at the closed panels that hid the sleeping niches. The awakened he had sent to the dream realm were going to return soon. Finally, when his coffee was almost gone, one of the panels slid away, revealing the insides of the pod there. Luster slowly opened his eyes and looked directly at Sonny. Then, the young man flinched back with a startled expression on his face.
"Say, Captain, what are you doing here?" Sonny silently brought the cup to his lips and took a sip.
I am drinking coffee, fool. What does it look like I am doing? Luster opened his mouth, then closed it. He seemed to be very confused.
"No, I mean, what are you doing in my citadel? How did you get here? That doesn't wait." He finally looked around, realizing that he was inside the Rhino. However, Luster's confusion only grew. He said, "That isn't my citadel." Sonny frowned, studying the young man's expression.
Why would you think that you are inside a citadel? Luster blinked a couple of times.
"Well, that's how things work, right? You go to sleep in the real world and are sent to the dream realm. Don't tell me." Sonny closed his eyes for a moment.
So what you are trying to say is that you didn't return from the dream realm. You fell asleep in the waking world and woke up in the real world. Luster let out a nervous laugh.
"Ha, that's impossible. Awakened don't stay in the real world when we sleep. But also, yes, the last thing I remember is settling inside the pod, sir." The corner of Sonny's mouth twitched. It seemed that the impossible had just happened. An awakened fell asleep without being transported to the dream realm. Luster's soul had remained in the dark tunnel. So did the souls of Kim and Samara when they woke up shortly after. The result was the same. They had been confused and startled. None of the three had managed to reach a citadel.
That's not good at all. Without saying much, Sonny reached within himself and tried to sense the familiar pull. The pull of his anchor in the dream realm. Usually, as long as he concentrated on the anchor, he would initiate the process of traveling across worlds. However, this time there was nothing, no matter how hard he searched. His soul seemed devoid of the dream realm's pull. His connection to the ivory tower was gone, just like the call, suddenly cold. Sonny glanced at the sea of darkness surrounding the fragile island of light where hundreds of refugees were trapped, shivering as they slept. What the hell is this place? Chapter 936. Anything that can go wrong. I should have known that something like that would happen. During one of his conversations with Professor Obel, Sonny had learned of a thing called Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong. He didn't know who Murphy was and why that person had been in a position to establish world-governing laws, but their veracity was hard to dispute. Perhaps that Murphy had been a bit of a tenacious cockroach himself, to come up with such an undeniable rule. In any case, that was exactly what had happened. Everything had gone wrong. Sonny had hoped to receive information and resources through the dream realm, but now that hope was destroyed. The strange nature of the endless tunnel prevented Awakened from traveling across worlds. He hadn't even known that something like that was possible. Sonny breathed a bitter curse. Damnation. Instructing the members of the cohort to keep the news to themselves. Sonny hesitated for a bit and then gave the convoy an order to break camp. They had to continue moving forward. At that point, he didn't expect to reach the exit. However, Sunny still needed information. The tunnel wasn't looping on itself, as yesterday's experiments had proved, so there had to be some other type of magic involved. He suspected that it was spatial in nature, but had to observe more to come to a reliable conclusion. The Rhino rolled forward and the civilian transports followed. Once again, they waded through the silent darkness, cutting it with beams of light. Stone walls flew by, and since their surface always looked the same, it was easy to imagine that the convoy wasn't moving at all and was instead stuck in place, cursed to repeat the same moment in time over and over again. The only thing that broke the monotony were the foreboding entrances to the side passages that occasionally appeared from either left or right. Sunny knew that the most logical solution would be to try and explore them instead of stubbornly trying to reach the exit of the main tunnel. However, he felt reluctant to do so, at least for now. It was as though everything was forcing him to make that decision, which was exactly what sent his paranoia into overdrive. It's almost like something is trying to lure us deeper underground, curse it. The side passages were too narrow for the Rhino to pass anyway, and he wasn't going to abandon the APC unless absolutely necessary. Sunny did pay the side passages a lot of attention, though, as he studied the entrances and the darkness that shrouded them. A small hint of suspicion appeared in his mind. Apart from that, he wasn't remaining idle, even if it might have looked like that to the rest of the people riding inside the Rhino throughout the next day. Sunny remained in his chair in the command suite. He did glance at the screens from time to time, but rarely, mostly. He just moved his fingers in a strange way, making it seem as though they were performing a complicated dance. At some point, Bait couldn't stay quiet anymore and asked in an irritated tone,
"What on earth are you doing? Are you trying to cast a magic spell or something?" There was deep unease and fear hidden behind that annoyance, though Sunny smiled.
"Actually, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I am an amateur sorcerer, you see." The young woman scoffed.
"Fine, don't tell me. I guess you finally lost your mind." But Sunny had told her the truth. Although she couldn't see them, he was actually weaving strings of essence between his fingers. At that point, Sunny was proficient enough to not cut off any of his fingers in the process, like he had in the Red Colosseum. There wasn't even a single cut on them, however, creating strings of shadow essence, not to mention arranging them into an actual weave, required a lot of time, concentration, and, most of all, of essence itself. That was why he hadn't been able to practice weaving a lot, if at all, after disembarking in Antarctica. The chain of nightmares was too dire and hectic, and demanded too much of him to waste those precious resources on unnecessary things. But now, things were different. By the end of the second day inside the tunnel, Sunny was able to create enough strings to turn an object into a memory. He needed a bit more for what he wanted to achieve, though. So he continued with the task through the night. On the third day of traveling through darkness, when people turned quiet and fear spread through the convoy like a plague, he produced Weaver's needle from the covetous coffer, as well as one of the transcendent soul shards he had stored there before. Any shard would have worked, but Sunny only had these at hand. The needle glowed with soft, golden radiance, using it to create the basic weaves. He began the process of turning it into a memory. Doing so was relatively easy for him, since he had done so many times in the past. This time, however, there was an especially thorny part of the process. Sunny had learned how to name memories through their weave at some point, but each rune took time and additional strings to create. Learning how to weave runes hadn't been easy, either, and had required both a good understanding of weaves and a deep knowledge of the runic language the spell used. He could skip that step, of course, in which case the memory would be simply called by the spell, but Sunny was going for something else this time. In the end, he tiredly put the needle down and let out a shaky breath. Both Professor Obel and Bait were staring at him with curiosity. The old man hadn't wanted to break Sunny's concentration before, but now he finally asked, "Young man, I am sorry, but could you perhaps explain what you were doing these past 2 days? I must admit, it looked quite bizarre in the start, but now we are both very intrigued." Sunny smiled.
I was preparing to send a message." With that, he dismissed the needle, which disappeared into a rain of golden sparks, making both Professor Obel and Bait blink. Then, Sunny summoned the runes and looked at the list of his memories. Visible only to him, the runes shimmered in the air: Sin of Solace, Bitter Cusp, Stilled Scream. Oh, and then the last one. Memory, I am stuck in an endless tunnel full of true darkness. How the hell do I get out? Asked Cassie, memory rank Transcendent Memory tier. The corner of his eye twitched. What an ugly sight. I'll definitely rename it later. Chapter 937, Exchanging Messages.
The memory Sunny had created was, of course, a message to Nephis. The shadow bond that connected them was an innate ability of his aspect, and as such, existed outside of the spell. It didn't matter that the convoy was isolated from the dream realm. Their tenuous link remained active. Sunny knew it because he himself was still able to see Neph's runes, so she should have been able to see his as well, he muttered. Well, that's done. The only question was how soon would Nephis see the message, and how long would it take for her to come up with a response? Sunny suspected that he was going to have to wait for a while. Morgan's Warbow proved that Forgemasters of Clan Valor were capable of naming the memories they created. However, he didn't know how high Changing Star's standing in the Great Clan was at the moment, and if it was possible for her to charge them with forging a specific memory for her, let alone do it quickly. In any case, he was sure that she would come up with something. Nephis was a frighteningly resourceful person when she needed to be, kind of like Sunny himself, he added. It won't be fast, though. With a sigh, he glanced at Professor Obel and Bate.
The convoy continued its meaningless march, hour after hour. The small column of vehicles drove through the overflowing darkness, their sense of time and direction slowly disappearing. The dark tunnel was just too eerie, inexorable, and unchanging. Everything there seemed like a strange, foreboding dream. From time to time, one of the vehicles would break down, forcing them to stop for quick repairs. The Rhino was operating on an advanced Spelltech engine, which meant that its fuel was soul essence. Luster was more than capable of keeping the APC moving indefinitely. The military vehicles had primitive Spelltech batteries serving as a backup energy source for their hybrid systems, so he was able to help the soldiers, too. The civilian transports, however, were entirely mundane in nature. Their fuel cells were immaculately designed and possessed a vast charge capacity, but were going to get exhausted sooner or later. Although it didn't seem like it, Sunny knew that the convoy was on a clock. They drove for the rest of the day and then made camp. The next day went by in the same manner. Sunny spent it on the roof of the Rhino, staring at the entrances to the side passages that would sometimes appear in the stone walls of the tunnel. By that time, they had traveled more than 1,000 kilometers inside the tunnel. If this place was abiding by the laws of nature, the convoy would have been passing under Erebus Field. Their final destination, right about now, with no mountains to climb and no nightmare creatures to fight, only the straight road and no obstacles ahead. The distance that Sunny had hoped to cover in weeks was traversed in a few days. He doubted that it would translate to the same amount of covered ground in the real world, though 2 days after he had sent his message, Nephis finally responded. Sunny had actually not expected to receive an answer so soon, but there it was. He habitually summoned the runes to check on Neph, and then blinked a couple of times, noticing that the list of her memories seemed much longer than it had been before. Ever since Changing Star joined hands with Valor, her soul arsenal improved by a lot. There were certainly benefits to being an adopted daughter of a great clan, so she would occasionally receive a memory or two. It seemed that she was being provided with a constant stream of soul shards, as well. Even if their influx had slowed at some point, most likely to hide the fact that Nephis possessed multiple cores. I am not envious at all. Yeah, I am not regretting my decisions, even a little bit. Sunny stared at the dismal walls of the dark tunnel, then at the battered convoy. The desperate people who clung to what little warmth they could find inside the ramshackle vehicles. Inside, then, he looked back at the runes, which showed that Nephis had gained 15 new memories in the span of a couple of days. Even if she was being nurtured by a great clan, that was too many. Frowning, he read the names of the new memories. Faint Glimmer, Ire Hearth, Nebulous Veil, Dire Warning, Haunting Aversong, Eager Cut, Altar of Denial, Rust Reaver, Testament of Malice. And 6 more, none of them seemed to have been created by the Forgemasters of Valor. Sunny scoffed. Clever. Smiling faintly in the darkness, he read the first letter of each memory in order. What he ended up with was a concise message. Find heart, cut, run. Find heart, cut, run. The meaning was quite clear. He had to seek out the heart of the true darkness that drowned the tunnel, destroy it, and then run as fast as he could. The first 2 parts didn't promise anything good, but the last one was downright ominous. Sunny didn't know what Cassie had seen or learned, but she wouldn't have included the word run if the consequences of destroying the mysterious heart of darkness were anything short of terrifying. However, how was he supposed to find it? And if that thing was so frightening, how was he going to destroy it? Really now, would it have killed them, to be more specific? He shook his head with a bitter expression. Well, it must haven't been easy to scrounge up 15 new memories, let alone ones with names that could be arranged into a simple cipher. So, Sonny thought that he should be thankful, he muttered. Yeah, thank you kindly. Regardless of how he felt, the course of action was rather clear, as Sonny stared at the walls of the tunnel that flew by. A dark entrance to a side passage appeared in view. What little of it could be seen showed a narrow road that sloped down at a steep angle. He quietly grimaced. I guess I won't be able to avoid crawling deeper underground in the end. How unexpected. Chapter 938, Food Delivery.
The convoy had stopped once again. This time, however, there was one significant difference to the place Sonny had chosen to set camp. It was situated near one of the side passages, which they had avoided at all costs in the past. Currently, the irregulars were gathered around the dark entrance, staring at it with gloomy expressions on their faces. Sonny didn't look too enthused either. After a while, he sighed and glanced at his subordinates, then asked, "Have any of you noticed it?" They looked at each other, not sure what to say. After a while, Dorn spoke in a somber voice.
Sonny silently shook his head. In the past few days, he had been observing the side passages attentively as the convoy passed them, trying to see if there was a pattern to when and where they appeared. The tunnel looked to be endless, after all, so it seemed that there was an endless amount of these branching paths, too, which was a bit weird. In the process of observing the side passages, a sinking sense of suspicion took hold of his heart, and by now, that suspicion was all but confirmed. He frowned.
Well, I don't blame you. It's pretty hard to notice. Then Sonny pointed at a particular spot on the stone wall of the tunnel, right where it made way for the open chasm of the entrance to the side passage. There's a small protrusion there, and on the opposite side, the stone is chipped near the floor. There's also that crack over there. They stared at the spots he showed, not quite sure of the meaning of these small, barely noticeable features. Sonny asked, "What about them?" Sonny lingered for a moment. Nothing, really, in and of itself, but if you watch closely, you would have seen that these exact imperfections are present at each of the entrances we passed in the last couple of days. The first one we saw during the initial scouting had them, too. With how rough the walls of the tunnel are, it's only expected that there would be nothing smooth about the side passages, but still exact cracks, at exactly the same spots, at hundreds of entrances. Don't you think it's strange? Luster stared at the chipped portion of the wall, then scratched the back of his head.
I don't get it. Did someone leave these marks on purpose? Sonny shook his head.
No, what I'm trying to say is that there are no hundreds of entrances. There's just one entrance and one side passage, repeating over and over across the tunnel. All these entrances we saw were the same and lead to the same place. The irregulars paled. After a long stretch of grim silence, Bell finally spoke and Sonny observed, "So, we are being invited somewhere." Noticing his carefree smile, Kim shivered.
More like being lured somewhere, don't you think? The swordsman just shrugged.
Well, an invitation has to be alluring, right? Otherwise, no one will come. Kim stared at him with a deadpan expression for a few moments, then turned to Sonny.
So what are we going to do, Captain? Sonny echoed Belle's smile, making her eyes widen slightly.
We are going to answer the invitation, of course. Sure, it all seems like a dreadful trap. After all, the damned tunnel more or less left us no choice but to try and explore the side passage. It's an ingenious food delivery system, if you think about it. The food delivers itself. We are the food in this metaphor, of course. And we are going to deliver ourselves to whatever it's that's waiting underground. Belle's eyes glinted.
And then we eat it instead of it eating us. Sonny cleared his throat.
That's the plan. We are going to try to only be eaten a little, at the very least. Something told him that his plan didn't sound too encouraging to the irregulars. He coughed. Also, I've it on good authority that we will have to get the hell out of the tunnel as soon as the thing trapping us inside is found and destroyed. So, we will split into two teams. One team will go down. The other will remain with the convoy and make sure that all vehicles get to the surface. The irregulars looked at each other, trying to guess who will be assigned to which team. Luster was their best pilot, so he would have to remain with the Rhino. Samara's aspect was less useful in narrow spaces, so there was no point in taking her deeper underground either. The rest of them, that was the question. Quentin looked into the darkness, and then asked calmly,
"So who's going to accept the invitation, Captain?" Sonny glanced at him with a dour face.
"You idiots, do I look like a hero to you? If I could take you with me, I would. Hell, I'd take a whole army. However, none of you can traverse the distance fast enough to return to the convoy in time. I can." He sighed, remembering one of the recruits he had decided to pass on, the guy who could create rifts in space. That aspect would have come really handy right now. However, there was no time to regret past choices. He was very happy with his cohort, too. Plus, I'm not going alone. I am taking Saint with me. What, did you think that I'd risk my hide if she wasn't close enough to save it? The irregulars grumbled for a bit, but eventually accepted his decision. Captain's echo was truly powerful. If a master and an ascended demon couldn't handle the source of the unnatural darkness, then the members of the cohort wouldn't be of much use there. Anyway, they weren't an ordinary master and an average echo either. Sonny gave a few more orders, making sure that the convoy would be fine in his absence, then called Saint and returned to the mouth of the side passage. The two of them faced the darkness, remained still for a while, and then silently dove into its cold embrace. Sonny breathed a bitter curse. Damnation. Chapter 939, In the Belly of the Beast. Plus, I'm not going alone. I am taking Saint with me. What, did you think that I'd risk my hide if she wasn't close enough to save it? The LR regulars grumbled for a bit, but eventually accepted his decision. Captain's echo was truly powerful. If a master and an ascended demon couldn't handle the source of the unnatural darkness, then the members of the cohort wouldn't be of much use there. Anyway, they weren't an ordinary master and an average echo either. Sonny gave a few more orders, making sure that the convoy would be fine in his absence, then called Saint and returned to the mouth of the side passage. The two of them faced the darkness, remained still for a while, and then silently dove into its cold embrace. Sonny breathed a bitter curse. Damnation. Chapter 939, In the Belly of the Beast.
The side passage was full of impenetrable darkness, too, flowing around Sonny as it turned him blind and deaf. The blade of the cruel sight was shining with a soft radiance, creating a small circle of light around him. That light seemed to be struggling against the tide of chilling blackness, making it appear more absolute. The walls of the passage were much closer to each other than that of the main tunnel, its roof lower, and the circle of light was even narrower still. All of that made Sonny feel extremely claustrophobic. He walked forward with a resentful expression on his face, feeling the floor slope downward beneath his feet. If there was one thing that reassured them, it was the silent silhouette of Saint, who was by his side. The quiet demon moved with her usual indifference, wielding the sin of solace in her hands. Together, they descended deeper into the belly of the mountain.
Curse it and damn it, and this is such crap. Sonny was, unsurprisingly, very nervous. There were a lot of things for him to be nervous about. Not only was he willingly walking into a trap of an unknown but immensely powerful nightmare creature, he was also surrounded by true darkness, the element that directly countered most of his abilities. Not only that, but he also found himself in a strange situation. Most awakened possessed at least one luminous memory. Those were usually both cheap and easy to get. So everyone had some sort of enchanted item to serve as a lantern in their arsenal. However, Sonny had never needed one, so he only had the cruel sight. Its light-eater enchantment allowed the somber spear to absorb light and then expel it. After months spent in the darkness of the polar night, most of the sunlight that it had devoured in the past was long gone. What little remained was supposed to last him a few hours. But what if he failed to complete his mission by then? Sonny brought several chemical flares with him, just in case, but he really hoped to not get a chance to use them. Additionally, he had to leave one of his shadows with the convoy, surrounded by true darkness. He couldn't turn into one to swiftly travel across the network of tunnels, but he could still shadow step back to one of his invaluable helpers. That was why Sonny had ventured into the depths of the mountain alone, hoping to escape whatever disaster waited ahead in an instant. So a quarter of his power was gone as well. Right now, Gloomy Shadow was with Saint. Creepy Shadow was augmenting the cruel sight, and the haughty one was wrapped around his body. The five of them were a fearsome quintet. Nevertheless, Sonny didn't feel confident. The odds were just stacked against him too much. What? It's really cold here, you know. Indeed, it was. Steam escaped from his lips, and his voice echoed off the stone walls, traveling far into the narrow passage. Sonny grew quiet, not wishing to announce his position to anything that might have been hiding in the darkness. They continued to descend, soon arriving at an intersection, which was drowning in darkness. It was the first one of many, just as Professor Obel had said. There was a whole network of tunnels excavated during the dark times here. Meant to serve as a bomb shelter in case of an all-out war, the tunnels cut deep into the mountain, creating a strange labyrinth. Sonny was sure that there was some logic to how they were arranged, but the intent of the engineers that had built this place escaped him. If anything, the system of passages and chambers cut roughly in the stone seemed random and disorderly, almost organic, and of course, each was consumed by darkness at this depth. Sonny started to feel as though the darkness was moving around him, flowing through the tunnels, like blood rushing through colossal veins. He shivered and muttered, "Calm down, damn it. Find the heart and destroy it." What if it wasn't a metaphorical heart, but a quite literal one? Gritting his teeth, Sonny continued forward, faced with the complicated maze of passages. He navigated through it following a simple principle. Each time they arrived at an intersection, he chose the path that led further down. For now, this method seemed to be working, since the surrounding darkness seemed to have become thicker and flowed faster. After a while, he started to hear a strange hum, low and distant like a quiet whisper. It reverberated through the cold stone, echoing and growing more persistent as Sonny ventured deeper into the network of tunnels. Struggling against a sense of vast, primordial fear, he glanced at Saint and then stubbornly continued walking. Soon, Sonny arrived at a dead end, or rather, what should have been a dead end. The tunnel he was following came to an abrupt stop, but the wall in front of him had collapsed, or had been shattered, at some point in the past, revealing an entrance to something that looked like a natural cave. He hesitated for a few moments, then climbed over the pile of rubble and entered the cave. It stretched forward, twisting and turning, growing so narrow that Saint had to fall back and now walked behind. The dark passages had changed from those cut through the stone by human tools to being rough and uneven. The floor rose and fell too, making moving forward hard. If Sonny had felt as though he was in a maze before, now he had completely lost his sense of direction. All he knew was that he was still moving down and that the darkness was flowing past him with increasing speed. The dull hum was growing louder and louder. By then, Sonny had been completely overcome by an irrational feeling that he wasn't traveling through a network of caves, but instead crawling through the veins of a bizarre, colossal, terrifying creature. What? It's really cold here, you know. Indeed, it was. Steam escaped from his lips, and his voice echoed off the stone walls, traveling far into the narrow passage. Sonny grew quiet, not wishing to announce his position to anything that might have been hiding in the darkness. They continued to descend, soon arriving at an intersection, which was drowning in darkness. It was the first one of many, just as Professor Obel had said. There was a whole network of tunnels excavated during the dark times here, meant to serve as a bomb shelter in case of an all-out war. The tunnels cut deep into the mountain, creating a strange labyrinth. Sonny was sure that there was some logic to how they were arranged, but the intent of the engineers that had built this place escaped him. If anything, the system of passages and chambers cut roughly in the stone seemed random and disorderly, almost organic, and of course, each was consumed by darkness at this depth. Sonny started to feel as though the darkness was moving around him, flowing through the tunnels, like blood rushing through colossal veins. He shivered and muttered, "Calm down, damn it. Find the heart and destroy it." What if it wasn't a metaphorical heart, but a quite literal one? Gritting his teeth, Sonny continued forward, faced with the complicated maze of passages. He navigated through it following a simple principle. Each time they arrived at an intersection, he chose the path that led further down. For now, this method seemed to be working, since the surrounding darkness seemed to have become thicker and flowed faster. After a while, he started to hear a strange hum, low and distant like a quiet whisper. It reverberated through the cold stone, echoing and growing more persistent as Sonny ventured deeper into the network of tunnels. Struggling against a sense of vast, primordial fear, he glanced at Saint and then stubbornly continued walking. Soon, Sonny arrived at a dead end, or rather, what should have been a dead end. The tunnel he was following came to an abrupt stop, but the wall in front of him had collapsed, or had been shattered, at some point in the past, revealing an entrance to something that looked like a natural cave. He hesitated for a few moments, then climbed over the pile of rubble and entered the cave. It stretched forward, twisting and turning, growing so narrow that Saint had to fall back and now walked behind. The dark passages had changed from those cut through the stone by human tools to being rough and uneven. The floor rose and fell too, making moving forward hard. If Sonny had felt as though he was in a maze before, now he had completely lost his sense of direction. All he knew was that he was still moving down and that the darkness was flowing past him with increasing speed. The nuclear hum was growing louder and louder. By then, Sonny had been completely overcome by an irrational feeling that he wasn't traveling through a network of caves, but instead crawling through the veins of a bizarre, colossal, terrifying creature. If it really is alive, then I don't want to know what kind of creature it's. Just as that thought flashed through Sonny's mind, the radiance of the cruel sight's blade suddenly flickered and was instantly extinguished. All that was left was utter darkness. Chapter 940, Heart of Darkness. El Damned knew that this would happen. There was a scratching sound in the utter darkness, and then a stream of bright scarlet flame shot out of a chemical flare, raising it above his head. Sonny looked at the narrow cave, which was now flooded with dim, ominous red light. The darkness retreated for now, but it seemed ready to pounce on him at any moment. Feeling his heart beating wildly, he glanced at Saint, who still stood behind him, unfazed. Turning away, Sonny grumbled. Well, what did I expect? She was born in the underworld, of all places. I bet Saint is feeling right at home in this misbegotten darkness. He remained motionless for a few moments, getting accustomed to the blood-red gloom that surrounded him. Then, Sonny bit his lip and took a step forward. Let's go, we still need to find the heart. The cruel sight wasn't supposed to burn through its reserve of absorbed light so soon. The chemical flare, which was supposed to burn for at least 15 minutes, stuttered and drowned in just 5, forcing him to ignite a new one. It was as though keeping true darkness at bay exhausted any source of light faster than it should have been possible. And the deeper into the mountain they went, the more pronounced that discrepancy became. Sonny cursed under his breath, curse it all. Sonny had dreaded reaching the heart of darkness, but now that he was literally burning through his flares at a concerning speed, he couldn't wait to find it. Sadly, it turned out to be harder than he had thought. The human-made tunnels above had an obvious direction, but the chaotic network of caves was both harder to traverse and all over the place. Sometimes he would follow a path downward, only to end up climbing for a while, other times. Descending deeper into the mountain only made the distant hum grow quieter, which told him that he was getting further from his goal. In the end, Sonny abandoned all pretense of knowing what he was doing and chose where to go randomly, relying on his intuition to show him the way. Soon, he discovered a new pattern. The passages where the darkness seemed to flow faster were the ones that felt correct to him. Armed with that knowledge, he hurried forward, knowing that there wasn't much time left. Time had lost all meaning, and Sonny only measured it by the amount of flares he had burned through, when there were only 2 of them left. He finally reached his destination. The walls of the narrow passage he was following suddenly disappeared, and he found himself in a vast, spherical cave in the dim red light. He could see dozens of similar dark holes opening into it, each leading to a different natural tunnel. However, Sonny didn't pay them any attention. All he could look at was a giant orb of jet-black stone that floated in the center of the cave, burning darkly with the crimson reflections of the flare's fire. The darkness flowed through it, or maybe was born from it. The hum he had heard came from the orb, like a rustle of waves that were imprisoned within it. Suddenly, he felt a terrible chill spread through his body, whatever that black sphere was. He knew that it wasn't something any human was supposed to see. Sonny murmured, "Cut, run." Sonny gulped. He couldn't believe that no one was guarding that thing. Then again, there was nothing guarding his own heart, either. If something managed to crawl into his chest, it would find his rib cage empty of defenders as well. Maybe not if Bloodweave had to say anything about it. His second-to-last flare was about to burn out. Stepping forward, Sonny chased all hesitation away from his mind and thrust the blade of the cruel sight forward. It struck the side of the black orb and slid off its surface without leaving a scratch. Sonny froze. The sound of the spear hitting polished stone seemed deafening, and when it died down, was it just him, or did the hum coming from the sphere grow a little louder? Glancing at Saint, he felt cold sweat rolling down his face and whispered, "Help me with it, will you?" The quiet night remained motionless for a moment, staring at the sphere with a hint of subdued emotion. Then her eyes suddenly flared, the flames inside them turning darker. Saint did something strange. She took a step forward and handed him the sin of solace. Confused, Sonny grabbed the hilt of the jade giant, feeling the infuriating whispers assault his mind. A voice whispered, "Pathetic." He frowned, surprised at the sudden thought. Was it a thought? At that moment, Saint took another step forward and unsheathed her broken stone sword. The jagged line of its shattered blade flashed through the darkness and sunk into the black surface of the sphere to the hilt. A small crack snaked its way up and down through the surface of the orb. Suddenly, the hum became almost deafening. Sunny breathed. What? Then the giant orb suddenly burst open, releasing a tide of darkness that washed over Sunny and Saint. Throwing him back, he fell on the cold stone, feeling something rustling against the steel of the undying chain. The flare was swiftly extinguished. In the last split second that it burned, Sunny saw what the darkness released from the sphere was and understood what the hum he had heard represented. It wasn't the rustle of the waves, instead. It was the rustle of countless tiny feet scraping against the shell of the black sphere from within. The flood of darkness that had escaped from the cracked orb was actually myriads of tiny beetle-like creatures that were now swarming over him like a river, already shredding the transcendent metal of his armor. Worse still, the tide of them was still flowing out of the broken sphere, rushing into the dozens of passages leading out of the cave like a flood. The sight of it was both terrifying and bizarre. No matter how large the shell of black stone had been, the mass of beetles it released, and was continuing to disgorge, was many times larger than what could possibly fit inside. At this rate, the whole mountain was going to be filled with them in mere minutes. So that's why she told me to run. Feeling a sharp pain suddenly pierce his side, Sunny belatedly realized a dreadful fact. He needed to enter a shadow to use Shadow Step, and with all light gone, there were no shadows left in the true darkness of the flooded cave. Chapter 941, Time to Run.
Sunny was buried under a moving carpet of dark beetles. His armor was being chewed through, and a few of them had already gotten inside somehow, their razor-sharp mandibles sinking into his flesh. He gasped. Sea crap. For a moment, his thoughts were scattered, but the sudden pulse of pain cleared them. Blinded, Sunny shuddered and tried to move his hand to cover the eye slits of his helmet's featureless mask. It was too late. One of the insects had already crawled through, since Sunny couldn't see anything. He only realized it when something cold and slithering brushed against his nose. He instantly closed his eyes, and a split second later, a sharp pain pierced his face as one of his cheeks was torn open. A repulsed hiss escaped through Sunny's lips, jerking his head. He felt the beetle fall down and then caught it with his mouth, crushing the bastard between his teeth. It felt like chewing on steel, but the resilient shell broke with an appalling crunch, filling his mouth with sharp fragments and an indescribably bitter taste.
Larg. Finally, he managed to free his hand from underneath the mass of beetles and covered the eye slits with it, then struggled to stand up. Sunny managed to rise to his knees, but at that moment, a new wave of beetles smashed into his chest, throwing him back down. Felt as though he was drowning. A crushing weight of the endless river of creatures pressed him down, making it hard to breathe. With each second, there were more and more of them, and the weight grew more unbearable. In the dark cave, the seething darkness that consisted of countless myriads of tiny insects was rising like a tidal wave, already flooding most of the tunnels. The uninterrupted surface of wriggling black insects was slowly crawling higher and higher, the shards of the broken sphere already disappearing beneath them. The rustling hum of tiny feet scraping against stone turned into a rumbling roar. Then, a hand in an armored gauntlet broke through the surface. The chemical flare grasped by it igniting with intense scarlet flame. Growling, Sunny pushed himself through the squirming mass of dark beetles and managed to rise to his feet with a stagger. Even standing, he was waist-deep in the rushing river of the black shells, as several of them continued to bite into his flesh. He briefly looked around. It took him a split second to take in the sight of the underground cave, which was painted crimson by his last flare and swiftly drowning in the tide of darkness. He had already dismissed Saint, so now all that was left for him was to run. Damned bugs, why did it have to be bugs? The flare in his hand stuttered, the stream of red flame it was spewing rapidly growing shorter, but before it died, he already dove into the shadows, disappearing from view. The fluttering flare fell into the mass of dark beetles and was instantly swallowed by it, the last hint of light disappearing from the hidden cave, perhaps forever.
Back in the main tunnel, the convoy was nervously waiting for something to change. Everyone was already loaded into the vehicles and waiting for the captain to return. Minute passed after minute with no news or hint. The ever-present darkness remained the same. Inside the Rhino, Luster was sitting quietly in the pilot's seat. Professor Obel and Bate were in the lounge area, discussing something among themselves. The young woman glanced at her communicator, then took a medicine pack from her bag. At that moment, something fell from under the roof, and a familiar figure crashed into the floor, shattering one of the robust alloy chairs in the clangor of metal. All they saw was the battered surface of the bleak armor and a mess of limbs. Rolling over his shoulder and jumping to his feet, Sonny wasted a second to catch his balance, and then jerked his head sideways to look at Luster.
What the hell are you waiting for? Drive, go as fast as you can, now. In the next moment, the whole mountain shuddered and streams of dust fell from the tunnel's roof. Luster's eyes widened, and he sent the APC forward without asking a single question. If the captain was shouting, things were seriously bad. Bate and Professor Obel both rose, startled by Sonny's sudden arrival. He gasped. What? He threw a hand in their direction and shouted, "Stop, don't get closer." As the Rhino rolled into the darkness, swiftly accelerating, the rest of the vehicles promptly followed inside the APC. The undying chain disappeared into a rain of sparks, leaving Sonny half naked. His pale body was covered with small, ugly lacerations, but there was almost no blood in sight. Several tiny black insects fell to the floor and were promptly and viciously stomped to death by him. Nevertheless, even after disposing of the beetles, Sonny didn't look relieved. Instead, he paled even more and then bent over, vomiting a mouthful of dark blood. Bate took a step forward, looking around in search of a medkit with a worried expression on her face. Sonny bared his teeth in a growl and snapped, "What's going on?" "Well, I said stay back." With that, a strange stiletto appeared in his hand. Its blade was long, narrow, and seemed to be forged out of ghostly glass. Without hesitating even for a second, Sonny sent both the young woman and the old man into a momentary shock by turning the stiletto against himself and plunging it into his chest. A startled yelp escaped from Bate's mouth. Drowning Sonny's own groan, Bate cried out, "Hey, what are..." "Oh, damn it." He twisted the Moonlight Shard in the wound, causing an ugly grimace to appear on his face, and then pulled the stiletto out. Impaled on it was the body of a strange beetle with a jet-black carapace, its shell broken, crushed, and smeared with blood. The tiny creature had almost reached his heart. A few moments later, and Sonny would have been in a sea of trouble. He stared at the dead insect for a few moments, and then shivered. The mountain quaked again. And a net of cracks appeared on the roof of the tunnel just ahead. Sonny looked through the windshield of the speeding APC and inhaled deeply. Not paying attention to the pain, he muttered, "Time to run." Chapter 942, Tide of Darkness.
Sonny had escaped the dark cave fast enough to not be eaten alive, or even to a serious degree. Just as he had joked, he ended up only being eaten a little. He groaned. "Ah, it hurts." There were a few bites on his body and one on his cheek. The most serious wound by far was the one he had inflicted on himself to get the last beetle from under his skin. The Moonlight Shard had cut deep, but guided by his steady hand, missed both his heart and anything else that was important. Still, it stung. Not that Sonny had time to pay it any attention. The Rhino was speeding forward, almost flying through the shuddering tunnel, all around it. The darkness was rippling and shifting. As if out of control, it felt like the thing they were inside of, whatever it might have been, was convulsing, not exactly in the throes of death, but maybe in agony. Sonny was pretty sure that the blow Saint had delivered to the Black Sphere wasn't fatal to the unknown being. Since he never heard the spell announcing a kill, the source of the true darkness wasn't destroyed, just damaged. Or maybe set free, hearing Luster call out to him. Sonny looked forward and saw an unfamiliar shape appear from the darkness. It was a rusted frame of an old personal vehicle, which they had never seen before. The implication made a pale smile appear on his face. Luster shouted, "Captain, that's new." The strange anomaly that had been keeping them inside the tunnel seemed to be no more. They were actually moving forward instead of traveling endlessly through a never-ending sea of darkness. Destroying the Black Sphere had really broken the binding. Luster murmured, "It's broken." He let out a shaky breath. If he hadn't received a message from the outside, things might have turned out differently. Sonny would have ventured into the side passages eventually, but probably without leaving one of the shadows behind. Even if he did, he would have definitely taken the rest of the irregulars with him. Then, they would have died, actually. He still struggled to believe that everyone survived. For now.
"We're not out of the tunnel yet." Suddenly cold, he looked at Luster and said, "We're not out of the tunnel yet." Suddenly cold, he looked at Luster and said, "Top speed and get us out of here." The Rhino flashed past the rusted vehicle, pushing it aside with its ram. The rest of the convoy followed, and soon they could feel the floor of the tunnel starting to slope up. That hadn't happened before, so Sunny took it as a good sign. Sadly, good things had ended after that. The mountain seemed to be coming to life around them. It shook and trembled, more and more cracks appearing on the walls and the roof of the tunnel. At some point, one of the walls collapsed just as the last vehicle passed it, and a flood of something dark and soothing flowed into the underground passage. Sunny shuddered, realizing that it were the beetles. The tide of them rushed into the tunnel like a river of black liquid. However, that liquid was behaving as if it possessed a maleficent sentience. Instead of spreading in every direction like water would, it seemed to deliberately rush in pursuit of the convoy up ahead. A deep crack appeared on another section of the wall, and a few tiny bodies fell from it on the road. Sunny spat a curse. Crap. All Sunny could do was pray that they would pass the swiftly growing crack before the stone wall shattered. Somehow they did. At that point, it seemed like the whole tunnel was ready to collapse. The civilian transport struggled to keep up with the Rhino, climbing up the quaking road. Behind them, the endless flood of dark beetles was gaining speed, swelling as new streams of them poured in. Dust and pieces of stone were raining from above. But ahead of them, in the distance, a circle of dim light appeared, the exit. It was still night outside, but at least there were the stars, the ghostly flames of the aurora, and maybe even the moon, although small. The difference between the true darkness of the underground tunnel and the mundane darkness of the outside world was apparent. They almost made it. No, they're going to make it. Sunny gritted his teeth as he watched the distant exit approach while the tunnel was breaking down around them. Just a bit more, just a little bit. Finally, the Rhino shot through the round opening, escaping into the chilling cold of the polar night. The vast expanse of the black sky appeared above, looking more beautiful than ever. Sunny grinned triumphantly. Then his grin disappeared. Finally able to see, he sent his shadows to take a look outside and studied their surroundings. The tunnel had led them quite high into the mountains. Behind them, the stone slopes were cracking and breaking, giant boulders rolling down into deep gorges with deafening noise. Rivers of darkness were flowing out of the mountain, all twisting to take aim at the escaping convoy. The damned beetles were continuing to pursue them even now. In fact, the wide streams of black insects seemed more like limbs of a colossal being than swarms of tiny creatures. They stretched and slithered,